Communist Party toiled for the nation. The Communist Party at one mind saved China. It pointed to the road of liberation for the people.
It pointed.
It led China towards the light.
The light.
It supported the war of resistance for more than 8 years.
Resistance.
It has improved people's lives.
It
It built a base behind enemy lines.
improved their...
It practiced democracy,
improved
bringing
things.
many advantages. Without the Communist Party,
And the
there
ladies,
would be
they
no
sing,
China.
they sing of it.
Without the Communist Party, there would be no new China.
Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao did it.
Without the Communist Party, there would be no new China. Without the Communist Party, there would be no new China. The Communist Party toiled for the nation.
You better fucking dance,
The Communist Party at one mind saved China.
or you will be executed,
Pointed to the road of liberation for the people.
and your family billed for the
It led
bullet.
China towards the light. It supported the war of resistance for more than 8 years.
Chairman Mao drops another
It has
word.
improved people's lives.
That's a real translation.
It built a base behind enemy lines.
100% accurate.
It practiced democracy, bringing many advantages.
Chock full of MDMA.
Without the Communist Party, there would be no new China.
You to dance your ass off.
Without the Communist Party, there would be no new China.
Freedom. Or something like it.
Without the Communist Party, there would be no new China. Without the Communist Party, there would be no new China.
Yes. That's the intro for today. Boy, say what you will about the Chinese Communist Party, but
Dance revolution.
you can sure make a
bitch.
dance number, I'll say that. If only all propaganda were so thoroughly, I'm not going to say enjoyable because I didn't really enjoy it, but did make me want to get up and move around. That's probably a bad thing with the ideological mixture thrown in. Kind of want those people to just sit around and do nothing, preferably. That's the ideal situation for people who have been politically radicalized. It's probably a good thing that we have so much beer, alcohol, Fritos, Doritos, etc. in America. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Michael Lucht, and you're listening to Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. This is the, for the most part, final episode in a series on Soviet/communist research into psychic phenomena, parapsychology, etc. So yeah, today we're going to take a look at Chinese Communist Party and their look into parapsychology, except they don't call it that. They call it something else, much like the Soviets with the word psychotronics. In communist China, they call it, and I'm probably going to butcher this, you're going to hear me butcher a lot of Chinese today, but that cannot be helped because I am ignorant American. In China, in communist China, it is called Teiyi Gongning, which translates roughly to extraordinary functions of the human body. They've also referred to a lot of this stuff as psychosomatic sciences, but largely the term Teiyi Gongning. That's going to cover pretty much everything. There's also Renti-Keju, I believe is how you say it, which also means human body science. So this is basically how they were able to frame all of this work and research and investigations, examinations, etc. into psychic phenomena and underlying abilities of the human mind/body working in unison like the workers of the world should in order to create a much greater a force to be reckoned with. And that is the Teiyi Gongning. Now, despite a lot of the mispronunciations and horrible just butchering of the Chinese language, I will try my best to pronounce as close as I can get. I'm also going to try to do my best not to pick the low-hanging fruit of ethnicity-based jokes. However, I will probably throw in a couple of misaligned cultural reappropriations between ninjas and things like that, possibly. So I'm just letting you know ahead of time. Trigger warning. We'll bill your family for that, don't worry. What else? Let's see. Oh, and also, I looked around for, there's a problem with translation, obviously, because I don't really think that my podcast is reaching very many people within communist China. So, and that's my number one market, which is what really upsets me about it. That's who I started this for. But nope, no can do. So, but once again, ahead of the curve, just letting you know, trigger warning, psychic triggers, because we're going to talk about the Manchurian candidate or candidates and why the name or place, the area, the location of Manchuria was chosen specifically for that. We're going to talk about Qigong. It's a form of energy, sort of a martial art, but not quite. We'll get into it. And we're going to talk about some of the people who were really the central figures within the movement of the CCP, as it will be known shorthandedly for Chinese Communist Party, looking into much of this phenomena. So off the top, I just want to let everyone know that if you have harnessed and augmented your own inner chi abilities and given yourself mind powers, this is what it sounds like when you think now. And as far as low-hanging ethnic-based jokes, I think really I'm just going to leave it to this old Chinese woman saying "fuck," and we'll call it even. But after that, or before that, we're going to hear a quick word from our sponsors, and we'll jump right into all of it. The whole messy walk on the wild side. Nah. You know, the more I find out about history and the reality that is veiled from our eyes on a regular basis, the more I drink. But you know what I don't like about all of this, other than the crushing existential despair that I feel every second of every day, is the hangovers. That's not going to make anything better. But luckily, there's a cure for hangovers. Liqueur gummies. Liquure. Liqueur gummies combine DHM, milk thistle, B vitamins, and ginger root to help your body recover after drinking. They fight fatigue, nausea, and dehydration, so you wake up feeling refreshed. Try them for faster recovery. Enjoy an exclusive discount with my promo code ICON, ICON, at liqueur.com, LIQURE.com, for 20% off any product, exclusively through Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. Thank you. You know, as I what's a good word? As I drudge through life and the trenches of just necrotic dreams, just evaporating like so much pink mist in a Middle Eastern war zone, I need something to help get me through, and that's why I like Shimmerwood beverages. Shimmerwood's award-winning CBD seltzers combine full-spectrum CBD with natural fruit shrubs, delivering a refreshing, stress-relieving drink that eases tension, and promotes relaxation. Enjoy an exclusive discount with my promo code at shimmerwood.com. Go to shimmerwood.com and use my promo code ICON, ICON, for 30% off any product, exclusively through Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. Thank you. I guarantee you I'm the only man on earth who is putting the truth in advertising. Not necessarily about the products themselves. They're great. But, you know, the human condition, basically. You'll hear it unfiltered here. That's right. Anywho, I also wanted to mention at the top of the show that while speaking of ethnicity and trying to not pander to the lowest common denominator of the low-hanging fruit of ethnic jokes, I will say, however, that the Chinese have probably the coolest ethnic slur or racial epithet, whichever term you prefer, for white people. It's one that I would not mind being called.
What's up?
Nope. It's Guilo. It means ghost man or foreign devil. I prefer the more ghost man level of it because it just is cool. I don't know. I've never taken umbrage with the term. I've heard it before. I've never been called it directly, But as far as ethnic slurs for or towards white people, Guaylo sits at the top, as for the coolest ethnic slur / racial epithet you could call a white person. Anywho, enough with the race already. We got to get into another race. The race for psychic domination over the mind gap. The mind gap that took place during the Cold War. Now, we already examined Russia and their psychotronics programs, but what was communist China up to? And always remember that when we speak of peoples and places on this show and the machinations of governments, always remember that it's not the people of these nations. Regular Chinese dude, probably hang out, drink a beer. Chinese lady, same. You know, it's not the people, it's the governments. It's the people in control. So remember that always when you go forward and you're talking about how China is allegedly supposed to eat our fucking lunch in the next 20 years or whatever, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. I don't see a lot of... I mean, we're too economically inextricably linked, first of all. But second of all, I don't think they give a shit about America. I don't know. That's just my take on it. From seeing what all, I mean, and you know, granted, I'm coming at this from the regular, everyday American idiot who has only had my nose in the book so far as their alleged psychic military / governmental explorations and investigations. But as far as like everyday shit, I don't think they give a flying fuck about America. Other than everyone's making money and everyone's fine. It's like the old mafia movies, like, you know, everyone's making money, everything's great. Do you really want to go to war and fuck that up? So, I don't know. That's just my take. I'm in my humble, ignorant American opinion. Anywho, let's get into something I know a little bit more about. Made up stuff. Actually, no, there's very real, very strange and interesting as all get out aspects to the CCP's research into psychic and related anomalous phenomena. And it goes a little something like this.
Like the kid, here goes.
So let's start off with the term Manchurian Candidate, because I think this is probably the first instance where most people in America kind of equate the Chinese Communist Party with brainwashing and or parapsychological, just weird realms of the mind, the twilight zone of the outer limits of the mind, which actually, by the way, I believe it was the Outer Limits. They did a fucking awesome episode about a shape-shifting communist Chinese assassin, which came out before the Manchurian Candidate. And also, I believe the writer of the Manchurian Candidate, I believe his name is Richard Condon, had dinner, I think this is the same guy, had dinner with Bobby Kennedy the night before he was assassinated. So very odd. One of those weird, quote-unquote, coincidences that occurs in history. But yeah, the term Manchurian Candidate comes directly from the title of the 1959 novel by Richard Condon, later adapted into the 1962 film starring Frank I Beat My Wife Blue Eyes Sinatra. And again in 2004 starring Denzel. I'm a perfectly normal human being and there's nothing wrong that anyone can really say about me. As far as I know, I left the Diddy party, Washington. But the reason Condon chose Manchurian, rather than, say, Russian or Chinese, is deeply tied to how the West imagined brainwashing during the early Cold War. After the Korean War, which took place from 1950 to 1953, several captured American soldiers made false confessions, quote-unquote confessions, or defected to the communist side. This alarmed U.S. intelligence and the public, and it seemed these men had been, quote-unquote, brainwashed, because no one of their own will or volition would do such a thing. That's just crazy. So the term brainwashing, quote unquote, was popularized by a journalist named Edward Hunter in 1950, who claimed that the communists had discovered psychological methods to erase and reprogram the human mind. Hunter and later CIA circles focused on Chinese and North Korean use of psychological coercion, interrogation, and conditioning. Rinse, lather, repeat. That's how you brainwash someone. So by the late 50s, the idea that the quote-unquote Reds, the Reds of the Red Scare, perhaps you've heard of them, could manufacture assassins or sleeper agents through hypnotic or psychological programming, and had become a major Cold War fear. So why Manchuria? Well, Manchuria was the region of northeastern China. Well, it still is a region of northeastern China, but it was the region bordering Russia and Korea. And it was chosen because it symbolized the crossroads of communist influence and mysterious remote control. It had been the site of intense wartime intrigues, Japanese occupation from 31 to 45. It was fucking horrible during that time. It's part of what initially made China one of our allies during World War II. And under the puppet state of Manchukuo, where Unit 731, perhaps you've heard of them, carried out many of their wartime atrocities, what the modern-day Japanese government refers to as incidents. So after World War II, the Soviets briefly occupied the area before handing it to the Chinese communists, making it a perfect setting for a red laboratory. Western audiences already saw Manchuria as an exotic, shadowy, and morally ambiguous frontier, ideal for secret conditioning experiments. Most frontiers will fall under the category of morally ambiguous sooner or later, until someone gets in there and puts their foot down, plants a flag in it, etc. In short, Condon used the term Manchurian as shorthand for foreign, communist, and essentially what is psychologically alien or other to the American mind state. In the novel and the film, for those unfamiliar, a U.S. soldier captured in Korea is taken to Manchuria, where he's hypnotically programmed by communist Chinese and Soviet agents to become a sleeper assassin back in America. His mind is split between a normal patriotic persona and a quote-unquote triggered killer state, activated by a hypnotic command, famously in the film, the Queen of Diamonds card. Now, the phrase triggered, very interesting. I don't know, that we've morphed that word etymologically into what it is now. I don't know. Are we all Manchurian candidates in one way or another? The CIA itself was, at that exact same time, running MK Ultra and related mind control experiments, trying to prevent or replicate such methods. Condon's novel hit right in the middle of that anxiety cycle, drawing from real congressional testimony to classified intelligence reports and hunters' journalism. The word Manchurian candidate, or the phrase Manchurian candidate, soon became cultural shorthand for anyone suspected of being a brainwashed pawn of a foreign power. So, in a nutshell, Manchurian equals a Cold War cipher for the mysterious communist East, which breaks down at this time to China, Russia, and the Korean nexus. Candidate is a person unknowingly groomed for subversive or violent acts, and the term endures as a metaphor for a brainwashed or compromised individual, especially in the context of politics. There was a very famous case, well, at the time, very famous. It's kind of completely forgotten today, but as far as the West and their introduction to a real honest-to-goodness subject of brainwashing, this would be Father George C. Carroll. It's for Carroll. George Carroll Powers. Father George Carroll Powers. There's a 1950s case of Father Powers. You're grounded. Sounds weird saying it out loud, but whatever. Father Powers was a Catholic priest and a Korean War POW who returned home in an evidently disturbed psychological state, and he essentially became a symbol of the red brainwashing menace. Father Powers was captured by North Korean and Chinese forces in 1950 and held for roughly 3 years. When he returned to the U.S., reporters noticed that he was disoriented, paranoid, and at times spoke in oddly rehearsed-sounding ideological slogans, praising quote-unquote peace and quote-unquote world unity in a way that echoed Chinese propaganda. When interviewed on television, he appeared emotionally flat, confused, and detached, and the press almost immediately seized on him as a victim of communist re-education. He wasn't violent or quote-unquote activated, like the fictional Raymond Shaw, the Manchurian candidate's assassin character, But his televised behavior frightened Americans because it seemed to confirm that even a priest could be mentally subverted by the Reds. A priest, a man of God, a man traumatized by the things he saw in combat, talking about world peace and unity. Well, that just doesn't make sense. Later medical reports suggested he was suffering from a combination of post-traumatic stress disorder from captivity, malnutrition, and sensory deprivation. Some of those happen to be the perfect ingredients for brainwashing. Cults do it all the time. He possibly was even suffering from a psychotic break or delusional disorder by that time. In the early 1950s, the nuance was lost upon the American public. What people saw was a brainwashed priest, his mind rewritten by his Manchurian masters.
5 minutes later.
Now, I tried my best, and by best I mean I spent at least 5 minutes looking for video or audio of the talk that Father Powers gave, but unfortunately it seems to be missing from the internet. Coincidence? Probably. It's very old. But yeah, no, if you can find it, let me know. Post it in the comments or wherever. Send it to me at cooksandcranks@gmail.com because I'd love to watch it. I've seen still photos from it, but that's about it. Anywho, besides Father Powers, there are many others throughout history who have been referred to specifically as Manchurian candidates within the context which we are discussing. Notably, Mr. Lee Harvey Oswald.
Back and to the left. 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 Back and to the left.
Aussie Rabbit, as he was also known, which I find strange. I don't know, there's a lot of weird rabbit connections, down the rabbit hole, white rabbit, etc. After the Kennedy assassination, the Manchurian candidate had been out for a few years, and many people, including intelligence officials, openly wondered whether Oswald had been hypnotically programmed while in the USSR or during his time in New Orleans / Cuban revolutionary circles, etc. The CIA even examined whether hypnosis or quote-unquote psycho-conditioning could be a factor in quote-unquote lone nut assassinations. A lot of lone nuts. They're all alone, the Lone Rangers. Researchers later found Oswald's profile eerily mirrored the novel's Raymond Shaw, the character who was in fact the Manchurian candidate in the book. A military defector, emotionally detached, and likely manipulated by intelligence factions. Now, a far more intriguing example would be Sirhan. Robert F. Kennedy's assassination has been explicitly called a Manchurian candidate, or his assassin, has been specifically called a Manchurian candidate by everyone from conspiracy theorists to forensic psychologists, which gives it a little more gravitas. It's got gravy all over it.
Smothered me in gravy, you big dirty man.
He claimed to have no memory of the shooting. Hypnotic scripts were allegedly found in his notebooks, such as RFK must die. He just wrote it over and over and over again, which is a little, as far as evidence goes, it's not looking too good. So some investigators, notably a Dr. Daniel Brown of Harvard, suggested he'd been subjected to trance conditioning. Whether or not that's true, the term Manchurian candidate became synonymous with him through media coverage. Make of this what you will. If the media is jumping on it and constantly referring to him as a Manchurian candidate, I don't know. But the story of Sirhan is very interesting. He also had, throughout his journals, if you will, his journal entries, references to the Rosicrucians, various, I hesitate to say occult groups, but Freemason adjacent groups, etc. And once again, RFK must die, etc., etc. You also have Patty Hearst, the heiress kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, who later joined her captors. I'm gonna just say it's straight up just whole cloth created by the Central Intelligence Agency. Her courtroom defense leaned on the idea that she'd been brainwashed. She was a domestic example of the Manchurian candidate. This case brought the term from Cold War espionage into the realm of domestic radicalization. It makes me, don't know, when you hear, like, on the news today, people talking about radical leftists, I don't know, all I can think is like, yeah, watch out, the Symbionese Liberation Army might fucking pop out of the corner. Who knows? Because Antifa, they're a bunch of, they're not a threat. Whatever. We're not on that subject today. But two other examples that you might have heard of are Mark David Chapman and John Hinckley Jr. Both were described in early tabloid and conspiracy press as quote-unquote Manchurian candidates, programmed assassins out to eliminate cultural or political figures. Hinckley's psychiatrist had links to intelligence-funded psychological research, which fueled speculation. Also, his family was buddy-buddy with the Bush family, so that's odd. That's just weird as well. In reality, and he's the man who took a shot and hit at Reagan, by the way, for those who don't know. In reality, both had well-documented psychiatric disorders to begin with, but the phrase Manchurian candidate persisted. For those who don't know, Mark David Chapman was the man who assassinated, quote-unquote, assassinated John Lennon, Saint John Lennon. What people don't probably know about Mark David Chapman is that he doesn't exist. He was, in fact, Stephen King. It's true, look it up. Modern political uses continue to this day. The term has since been repurposed as an accusation of political treason or mental compromise. Donald Trump.
China,
Has been called a Manchurian candidate by critics for his alleged ties to Russia. Well, they're not all that alleged. They're pretty blatant. A woman by the name of Tulsi Gabbard, I'm told, and others have had the phrase thrown at them by opponents implying a foreign loyalty. And of course, in pop culture, it's become shorthand for anyone suspected of being a sleeper agent, or psychologically compromised operative. The phrase Manchurian candidate was never just about hypnotic assassins. It captured a national fear that the human mind itself could be colonized, whether by communism, foreign ideologies, radicalization, or the media. The priest, Father George Powers, his televised confusion, the defector assassins, and the quote-unquote radicalized heiress in the form of Patty Hearst each reinforced the idea that the enemy did not need bombs, just control over consciousness. Now, boy howdy, that list of people that I just mentioned has quite a few people who have been brain pickled by the CIA, one way or another. There are legitimate ties. I'd also like to point out here, there was the instance of the Catholic priest being quote-unquote re-educated by the Red Menace. That was what really got everyone up in arms. Now, for regular listeners of the show, you know that I'm very, very interested, very intrigued by the intelligence agency manipulation or use in any way of religious belief, specifically prophecies, etc., Third Temple movement, things like this, as how it intersects with intelligence agencies, intelligence operations, etc., in much the way that various conspiracy theorists throw around accusations towards the Hebrews and the Shebrews. I don't know. I tend to zero in on evangelical Christianity, but I think my perceptions on that are largely colored by how things have morphed in the political landscape over the last 40-ish years, and how evangelical Christianity and white Christian nationalism have become so ingrained in the political machine that we see rolling out today. But I'm also trying to get better about my own perceptions and realizing, having the self-awareness for introspection and better looking at my own beliefs and why I believe the things I do, and tracking them down to where they come from and why my prejudices exist. Because this is how we become better people. Aww. There is no, not all birds are blackbirds, etc. Not all Germans, as the phrase goes, ... I don't know if there's more to that phrase. Really, all you have to say is not all Germans. And I think most people get what you're talking about. Really, all it boils down to is another phrase I've heard a famous conspiracy theorist or conspiracy theorist critic, Mr. Robert Anton Wilson, famous hippie thinker, got some of his own problematic ties, I think, maybe, I don't know, according to some sources, but I heard him say it, and I'm sure he's quoting someone else because he's a bookish fella, but the phrase, only the madman is certain. It resonates with a very, very deep truth to it, because anything can be anything. Anyone can be anyone.
Huh?
The vaguest statement holds some truth, because it came out of a fortune cookie. But no, yes, only the madman is certain. It's just a way to recognize that, you know, what we think is going on doesn't necessarily mean that's what's happening. But I digress. To understand Chinese parapsychology, you first need to understand the deep metaphysical background of Chinese civilization and how Maoism, under Chairman Mao, attempted to rewrite it. So the following is a sort of, because this topic is so huge and involves thousands of years of Chinese history, I'm going to condense it into the quickest, most breeze-through-it way I can that connects ancient cosmology, spiritual practices, and revolutionary ideology, or ideologies, all the way into Cold War psychic research. So the ancient Chinese secret, spiritual imagination, the cosmos is a continuum. Traditional Chinese religion is plural, it's syncretic, meaning it's a admixture of various beliefs and practices, and it's non-exclusive, which is, I think, is just tops. What in the West might be separated into philosophy, religion, and magic existed as a continuous field of practice, essentially. There's not as clear a demarcation between the three. So some of the core beliefs that are at least germane to today's episode, Tito, Qi, or Qi, it's a vital energy that pervades the cosmos. It's in everything. It is the Force from Star Wars. Like, that's what it is. That's what the Force from Star Wars is based on. So if that helps, I find pop cultural touchstones usually help ground things for people. So it's a vital energy that pervades the cosmos. It's the animating life force that flows through humans, the earth, and the heavens alike. Then you got yin and yang. Now, to get into the entirety of what all this concept and its symbol means would take, there's just not enough recording space. But yin and yang and the 5 phases, which are known as Wu Jing, it's basically a dynamic system, or systems, if you will, for describing change and correspondences. And it consists of wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Not as static elements as we know them in Western esotericism, but intertransforming energies. These are constantly interacting and affecting one another, and it's the interactions that are essentially seen as metaphorical or models for various phases and functions that take place throughout reality and existence. Then you have Taoism, or Taoism, both a religion and a system of inner alchemy. Taoists practice meditation, breathing exercises. They use talismans and quote-unquote techniques of immortality, including early bioenergetics. It's a term that's very new to me, but I've seen it pop up quite often in all of this communist esoteric research. Bioenergetics, and that would later be reframed as the practice of Qigong, or Qigong. Then you have Confucianism, which is a moral/ritual order emphasizing harmony, hierarchy, and the cultivation of virtue. It is more philosophy than anything, but once again, the demarcation lines between philosophy, religion, and magic are very blurred in much of this. But Confucianism approaches essentially ways to better approach governance and social life. So if that, once again, this is breeze through. This is sub 101 stuff, but I have to bring it up because it lays the groundwork for much of what we'll be getting into. And then, of course, there's Buddhism, one of my, I'm not going to say favorite religions, but it's one that makes a lot of sense to me. They have a certain technology built into it, like a technology of mind and spirit. But Buddhism was imported from India around the 1st century CE. It fused with Taoist and Confucian thought. It later gave rise to Chan, or Zen, as it's known in Japan, Zen Buddhism, and syncretic cosmologies involving karmic causality, rebirth, meditation, etc. And then you have various, and I mean various, there is a bunch of folk religions and the use of mediumship, talking to or interacting with spirits, specifically, or, well, for the most part, the spirits of ancestors. There's a lot of ancestor veneration. It's a huge cultural touchstone throughout much of this, but it's everyday spirituality, the practical stuff that people used every day, blended with ancestor worship, geomancy, aka feng shui, spirit writing, exorcisms, veneration of local spirits or gods. Like there's a concept known as the city god. This is one of the concepts I find very interesting, that every location, be it a city or a village, etc., has its sort of overmind, a spiritual psychic entity that encapsulates the zeitgeist. So there's all these different zeitgeists running around, zeitgeisting with each other, etc. But at its heart, Chinese metaphysics assumes no sharp line between matter and spirit. Mind and cosmos mirror each other. Psychic cultivation via meditation, breath exercises, or ritual is a way to tune the self into the universal field of qi, or qi. And this worldview underlies everything from traditional medicine to martial arts to weather magic, of all things. So, later on, in more fairly recent Chinese history, comes the shock of modernity and the May 4th secularization, which occurred in the early 20th century. By the late Qing or Qing, I'm not quite sure which is the correct pronunciation. Once again, some of the butchering of the Chinese language is unavoidable at this point. But anywho, by the late Qing, I'm going to go with Qing, early Republican eras, so from the 1800s to the 1930s, intellectuals began attacking quote-unquote superstition as a barrier to national progress. The May 4th movement in 1919, which occurred on, anyone? Yes, May 4th, that's correct. It championed science, reason, and democracy against the old order. Spirit writing cults and Taoist alchemy were dismissed as relics of a feudal backwardness. Paradoxically, however, this era also birthed new hybrids: spiritualism, theosophy, psychical research, etc. All these things were blowing up worldwide, not just in China, not just in America, not just through Europe. This was a worldwide phenomenon where all this stuff popped up around that time. Or at least the ideas cultivated and took off. They sort of took form finally, crystallized in the public consciousness. The educated elite experimented with seances, hypnotism, telepathy, etc., and often framed all of this as modern science catching up to ancient Chinese wisdom, at least in China. This blend of rationalism and mysticism would later reappear inside state parapsychology labs under the CCP, Chinese Communist Party. Within this time frame, mid-20th century, comes along a fellow by the name of Mao Zedong. I'm probably mispronouncing that too, but once again, what are you going to do? China, China, China.
China, 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 China. I've been saying China, 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 China.
Mao Zedong and the Cultural Revolution. This roughly spanned the years from 1949 to 1976 and could be framed as a war on the invisible. When the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949, Mao's regime saw itself as forging a new, scientific, materialist civilization. Religion and traditional metaphysics were recorded as superstition, tools of feudal oppression. However, incidentally, paradoxically enough, everything about the Cultural Revolution took shit back to year zero. It really fucked everything up. People ate each other. I'm not fucking bullshitting. That happened. If you were even suspected of being an intellectual, if you wore glasses, that was your ass. So there was early anti-superstition campaigns in the 1950s. Temples were closed, monks forced into secular life, and mediums labeled as counter-revolutionary. Counter-revolutionary was a term that was the equivalent of being called a witch in puritanical early America. It meant your ass. So the Great Leap Forward, 1958, 1961, roughly, is a mass mobilization drive that demanded ideological purity and conquest of nature itself. Even heavenly forces were declared subject to human will. The Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 76, approximately, Mao's Red Guard sought to annihilate the four olds: old ideas, old culture, old customs, and old habits. So, I don't know. If you're trying to quit smoking, time travel to the time of the Cultural Revolution, and you'll probably quit smoking pretty fucking quick. Anywho, religious texts were burned. Taoist, Buddhist, and folk shrines were desecrated. Spiritual masters were humiliated or executed. Or worse. That's right, worse than executed. Psychic and occult activity was equated with political deviance. However, Mao's rhetoric had its own quasi-religious structure. Communism, in fact, altogether had its own quasi-religious built-in structure. We talked about this more in Red Shambhala and the previous episode on Soviet psychotronics. It's just built in. It all has very definitive language to it. There's talk of a spiritual apocalypse of sorts, for lack of a better word. Keeping in mind that the word apocalypse means revelation. It's not necessarily a doomsday. However, there was a lot of doomsday looking and sounding type shit going on. But anywho, Mao was described in messianic terms as the Red Sun. So, once again, you have a deification of a human being who is the head ideologue of a movement. And we've seen this happen more and more throughout history in this time. If you've listened to the last several episodes covering much of this governmental investigation and examination and research into esoteric practices, you see it a lot. It was something that was happening quite a bit around that time. It's happened throughout history. I'm sure it'll happen again. But there were mass line campaigns, which is one of Mao's key ideological and organizational methods. Basically, the mass line, or Chunzhang Lujian, perfect, was Mao Zedong's term for this version of bottom-up Marxism, at least in theory. The idea was that the Communist Party should go to the masses, learn what the people think and feel, synthesize their ideas, refine these thoughts into coherent socialist policy, and then return them to the masses. Reintroduce the policy as party doctrine. In practice, it became a form of mass mobilization and control. The party would rally millions of citizens through campaigns like the anti-rightist movement, the Great Leap Forward, and the Cultural Revolution, using public participation to enforce ideological purity and suppress dissent. During the Cultural Revolution, once again 66 to 76, the mass line metastasized like a cancer in your asshole, into a ritualized form of political theater. Struggle sessions, which sounds kind of silly. You take a lot of places off the top of your head with a struggle session, but we'll get into why they're horrific in just a second. There's public denunciations and the destruction, once again, of the four olds: old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. It was effectively a mass-scale psychic reprogramming operation. Mao reframed spiritual devotion, mysticism, and traditional morality into revolutionary fervor for the party and himself, creating what some scholars have described as a political religion. Once again, Marxism as, or at least the language therein, the ideas therein, the concepts of Marxism having its built-in equivalency to religious fervor. Excuse my voice, I caught whatever Alex Jones has, and it's messing up my voice a little bit, so bear with me.
I know, I get it, I killed them.
Now, struggle sessions, as mentioned earlier, the Pidu Hui? Woo! Okay, that was a tough one. That's the Chinese name for it. This literally translates into criticism fight meeting. Sounds a lot like, I don't know, I could maybe see some modern parallels here. with criticism fight meetings occurring around the country in America today. But this is a form of essentially public humiliation, psychological torture, and ideological correction, quote unquote, ideological correction, widely used during Mao's campaigns, especially during the Cultural Revolution. A struggle session was a highly ritualized public spectacle. It was part confession in the religious Catholic sense, part mob trial. They were often held in schools, factories, or the village square, right out in the open in front of everyone, with hundreds of people gathered around as witnesses and, more often than not, participants. The accused could be teachers, intellectuals, religious leaders, landlords, or bureaucrats. Anyone labeled as quote-unquote counter-revolutionary, as bourgeois, which the word bourgeois, it's very bourgeois, I think. I don't know, to use that word. That's just me, though. It's a bit of a paradox. People labeled as reactionary or class enemies. Essentially, the accusations were held in the public square, more often than not. Party activists or Red Guards would read out the person's alleged ideological crimes, thought crimes, essentially, such as worshiping superstition, quote unquote, or spreading feudal ideas, or harboring capitalist sympathies. Oh no. The accused would be forced to bow or kneel in a jet plane position, essentially, arms out, etc. Very akin to crucifixion, oddly enough. Head forced down, arms bent backwards, sometimes placards or cards with their name and the crimes were hung around their necks. It's very, it's very dunce cappy in old-timey schools, houses of learning. The crowd would shout slogans like "Down with the class enemy" or "Long live Chairman Mao." Yeah, the rhythmic chanting and group energy reinforced the hive mind atmosphere. So under immense pressure and often physical beatings, the accused would quote unquote confess their ideological sins, whether real or fabricated, and beg for forgiveness from the people and the party. Because only the party, only the communist ideology can hand down life lessons from up on their cloud, cracking eggs of knowledge all over the people, and a few skulls as well. So in the quote-unquote milder sessions, this ended in coerced repentance. In harsher ones, people were beaten to death, driven to suicide, or sent to labor camps for quote-unquote re-education. And it's all about re-education today. That's the foundation of much of what we're talking about. Struggle sessions served as both punishment and a vehicle for learning, re-education. They conditioned the masses to self-censor and internalize party ideology. They turned spiritual devotion, the ancient Chinese notion of moral cultivation, into revolutionary zeal. In effect, it was a psycho-political ritual, replacing religious confession with Maoist confessions, replacing ancestor veneration with adoration of the chairman and the party. It sure does sound horrific. So all the temples, shrines, religious historical artifacts, etc., people being eaten, all the stuff I just mentioned being destroyed, or in some instances, if it was worth money, sold off to foreign nations, countries, outside parties, etc., individuals. The Cultural Revolution was one of the most traumatic internal cataclysms in Chinese history, and that's a long fucking history. They were much better at record keeping and recording their history than the West would become. I mean, they had a jump on things. I think that's maybe why it's like the year 5000 or something over there. I forget what the calendar is exactly, but yes, different calendar. Call up China, ask for the lottery numbers next week. So the government later tried, and mostly failed, to reconcile with the devastation. This was called the Great Unmaking, which also, oddly enough, took place during the very same years as the Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976, when Mao launched the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. Woo! Boy, you can smell the bullshit wafting off a lot of these phrases and words, the terminology being used. His goal wasn't just political control, it was a total ideological purification, the eradication of the four olds: old customs, old culture, old habits, old ideas. So Taoist and Buddhist temples were looted or destroyed in mass. Monks and nuns were beaten, or worse, and quote-unquote re-educated, or forced to marry, even. Make of that what you will. Confucian sites, including the Kong family cemetery in Khufu, were vandalized. Ancient tablets were smashed, graves desecrated. Even ancestral shrines, the core of Chinese domestic spirituality, were torn down in various villages. Families were forced to burn entire genealogies and spirit tablets, which is an act akin to cutting off one's lineage. It's like blowing up the servers for 23andMe today. Maybe even worse. I don't know. But priceless scrolls, paintings, and ritual bronze statues, sculptures were destroyed in Red Guard bonfires. Museums were ransacked, libraries emptied. The Red Guards even targeted archaeological sites and folk statues, considering them as superstitious relics. Scholars of religion, history, and literature were exiled to labor camps or just, quote-unquote, disappeared. They just disappeared. Don't know what happened to them. The cumulative loss is impossible to quantify at this point. Some estimates say 2/3 of all temples in China suffered severe damage. Maoism functioned as the replacement religion. The chairman's portrait replaced ancestral tablets. The Little Red Book, Mao's how-to publication, essentially, replaced ancestral tablets and sutras and various other religious texts. Struggle sessions replaced moral self-reflection. The population learned to channel its spiritual instincts into political devotion, and this is why scholars sometimes describe Maoism as a millenarian cult. It promised collective transcendence through class struggle. That's one of the basic underlying foundations of Marxist communism, is the collective transcendence through class struggle. It sounds really fucking boring. It's not the way I would prefer that we come to a collective transcendence, but, you know, I'm just me. So, who's with me? So, after Mao died in 1976, the trauma left behind was profound. Under Deng Xiaoping, Deng Xiaoping's reforms in the late 1970s to 80s, religion was gradually re-legalized, but under tight party control. Major temples like the Shaolin and the Wu-Tang, yes, that's right, and Lamaist monasteries in Tibet were rebuilt, mostly as tourist sites or cultural heritage symbols, not living, breathing, functional religious centers, so to speak. Folk religion revived quietly in rural areas, often disguised, as folk customs to avoid political scrutiny. You had to. It's very much parallel to the witch hunts or the creation of some of the Afro-Caribbean religions, like voodoo, for example. These practices and beliefs sort of were developed in secret, so as not to rain down the terror of the state upon your head due to your belief system. The deep communal faith structure, such as temple networks, local deities, and the lineage of folk practitioners was effectively severed. So the older idea that spiritual practice and political life should harmonize under the name or phrase Tian Ren He Yi, which means the unity of heaven and man, is an older concept that was replaced by a strictly Marxist materialist worldview. This ideological vacuum helped explain why, by the 1980s to 1990s, the Chinese state became weirdly open to quote-unquote scientific explorations of parapsychology, qigong, and psychic energy. These pursuits reframed ancient metaphysics in techno-scientific language, making them ideologically safe, or, in the original sense of the phrase as it was created for, this way to be used in this context, politically correct. The dream of transcendence didn't vanish. It changed, it mutated into state-sanctioned research on human potential, supernormal abilities, and quote-unquote scientific spirituality. The Cultural Revolution killed religion, but it didn't kill the hunger for transcendence. It just forced it to wear a lab coat. This is a pretty obvious instance of, in my opinion, of sublimation. Sorry, my voice is really fucked up from chanting in Sanskrit/Spanish to keep the lechuza away. That's another story for a later date in the not too distant future. Back to the show. It's the inadvertent resurfacing of occult or psychospiritual forces reasserting themselves out in the open. Sublimation in psychoanalytic theory is defined as the diversion or modification of an instinctual impulse into a culturally higher or socially more acceptable activity. It's called sublimation, channeling anger into physical activity, the transformation of something into a purer or idealized form. The collection captures the sublimation of hardship into eternal value and beauty. That's the dictionary definition. What's fascinating in China's case is that this wasn't just individual sublimation in the Freudian sense, but a civilization-scale repression and roaring return. The Maoist state tried to annihilate the metaphysical substrate of Chinese culture, such as ancestor veneration, spirit meditation, cosmic harmony, etc., but those forces were too structurally integral to society to stay gone for long. By the 1980s, they reemerged in a secular guise. Qigong fever became mass mystical revival under the banner of quote-unquote health science. ESP and psychotronic research let intellectuals explore telepathy and energy fields while avoiding quote-unquote superstition charges from the state. Even the party's own rhetoric about quote-unquote a harmonious society later echoed Confucian cosmology, an unconscious return of what it once purged. It's as if the Chinese psyche, denied ritual expression for a generation, transmuted religion into scientific research of the esoteric. The lab became the new temple, the psychic researcher a modern monk, and the state, seeking control over both mind and matter, found itself paradoxically re-enchanting the world it had tried to flatten. You could almost frame it as from Mao's anti-superstition crusade to the scientific pursuit of superpowers. This is the unconscious continuity of China's sacred imagination. So also, going forward, just a few more useful terminology we might need to know. We've got Qi, or Qi. Everyone should know that by now. Qigong translates to energy work. A family of breathing, movement, and meditation techniques to cultivate and regulate Qi, or Qi. Modern Qigong blends Taoist, Buddhist, martial, and medical traditions and became the focus of mass, popular, and scientific fascination during the 1980s and 90s. The Qigong boom. Qigong fever. Well, not Qigong fever. That's a specific... Well, we'll get into it. There's also Gong Fu. This literally translates to skill achieved through effort. And while often used to mean Kung Fu, it can also describe a spiritual or mental discipline gained through long practice. There's also Xiaohu Urumo. It literally translates to fire enters demon. Describes a spiritual or mental breakdown from misapplied meditation or Qigong. Often translated as Qigong deviation or Qigong psychosis. Qigong fever. Historically a Taoist warning that overzealous practice can unbalance the body and mind. Then you've got Shin Tong. Supernormal powers. That's the literal translation. Supernormal powers, or psychic abilities. This includes clairvoyance, telepathy, psychokinesis, and remote viewing. Qigong researchers in the 1980s used this term when studying special function children, which I don't have a direct translation on that. Kind of afraid to look that one up, to be honest. And then, once again, Te Yi Gong Ning, as we mentioned close to the top of the show, which translates to extraordinary functions. It's a state-approved term during the 1980s for psychic or paranormal abilities, from telekinesis to healing and remote viewing. It's used in military and scientific contexts to avoid any potential religious language, which, as you know, by this time, meant yo ass if you were sniffed out and even suspected of being quote-unquote counter-revolutionary. And then you got Ling, L-I-N-G. This is often translated as numinous or spirit or efficacious. It refers to the mysterious responsive power of gods, places, people. It's a key term in understanding how Chinese culture blurs the lines between the spiritual, the psychic, and the natural worlds. And then there's Tao, Taoism, which translates as the way. Once again, this is a super breeze through on a huge concept, but it's the metaphysical order underlying all existence in Taoism. The cultivation of qi and harmony with the Tao is central to inner alchemy, mysticism, and later scientific reinterpretations of consciousness and energy. Then you've got Neidan, which means inner alchemy. It's a Taoist discipline of transforming the body's energies, essence, or Jing, breath, qi, or qi, and spirit, or Xin, into immortality, or higher awareness. Provided much of the rhetorical background for Qigong and later psychic energy research. And, yes, there are also elements that involve jazz and ragu concoctions. If you look at the previous episode on traditional Chinese medicine and medicinal cannibalism, the use of various human bodily fluids and byproducts, excretions, in a medicinal context, etc., but also a folkloric / occult context as well. I will say you can't spell secretions without the word secret. Tantra. Thank you. The lines blur quite warily. Then you've got Jinli, which means mind or psyche. It's modern Chinese psychology, borrows the term, basically, is used in Jinli Zhu to mean psychology, or Jinli Yanju, which means psychological research. The term's flexibility allowed early parapsychologists to frame psychic study as mind science rather than any form of mysticism. Then there's Ziran, which means natural or spontaneous. So in Taoist thought, it means attuning oneself to the self-ordering pattern of the cosmos. Microcosm, macrocosm. Basically, your body and existence rhymes with the universe. It is often invoked by modern Chinese scientists when describing the unity of consciousness and physical law. And then the aforementioned Feng Shui. I'm sure everyone has at least surface level familiarity with the term, but it means wind and water is the actual translation. The traditional geomantic system aligning buildings and graves, specifically burial sites, with the flow of qi in the landscape. Sometimes this resurfaced in state or military planning discussions under environmental harmonization, or once again, bioenergy fields. And then yin yang, once again, breeze through a huge concept, encapsulating as best I can. This encapsulates complementary polarities that compose all phenomena. So dark light, passive active, female male, inner outer, good evil, if that's if you're into that, if you're cheeky, core to both medical and metaphysical problems and systems, including the balancing of qi in the body and the mind. And then finally, there's Hun and Po. These are the two souls in classic Chinese belief. Hun is the ethereal yang, the yang element of yin and yang, the spiritual side. Hey, Hun. And then Po, corporeal, the yin side, animal, the meat body, if you will. Their separation at death shaped Chinese ghost lore and later ideas about consciousness and out-of-body experiments. So, Qigong. Qigong, literally, once again, meaning energy work. Qi being the vital energy that flows through the body, and gong, meaning disciplined skill or cultivation. So it's the proper harnessing, augmentation, and usage of qi energy. It's a broad umbrella for breathing exercises, slow movement routines such as Tai Chi. Old folks in the park, probably seen them doing it. I've tried it a few times. I wish I had more room to really stretch out. But I don't know. I need to exercise because I am a fucking pile. Anyways, visualization practices aimed at balancing internal energy and improving health, longevity, and spiritual awareness. Now, historically, this synthesizes Taoist inner alchemy, or Neidan, refining the vital essence into spiritual enlightenment. Buddhist meditation and Chan or Zen breathing techniques, traditional Chinese medicine theories of qi circulation through the various meridians in the body. This kind of takes into effect the chakras of the body, which align with various oh God, glands. It's a glandular thing. You wouldn't understand. Most of the proper or major glands in the human body align with much of the chakra system, and then you've got the extended nervous system, etc., throughout the body, where there are major meridians. And this is actually the underlying fundamental principle behind much of what is practiced in acupuncture. This is like the roadmap for the various energies that flow through the body and how they can be blocked or rerouted or harnessed or expent in various ways. So martial arts training like Tai Chi or Jingyi or Bagua that use Qi for physical, or Qi for physical prowess, and focus. So in short, Qigong bridges medicine, philosophy, and mysticism, and it's simultaneously a form of therapy, self-cultivation, and metaphysics. Now, the Qigong boom, which I referred to earlier, after Mao's death in 1976, China's ideological vacuum collided with a sudden new openness to science, quote unquote. In the early 1980s, charismatic Qigong masters began claiming not only the medical benefits, but paranormal powers, such as remote healing, psychokinesis, and ESP, allegedly verified in laboratory tests. This period of roughly 1978 to 1995 became known as Qigong Ray, or Qigong Fever, which is a bit misleading because it could also be referring to the Qigong psychosis I mentioned earlier. But they meant fever as in a craze, a national craze, comparable to the American New Age movement, except this was state-endorsed. Tens of millions attended mass Qigong gatherings in parks and stadiums. There's lots of footage you can find of this. They're kind of fucking cool to watch, actually. It's crazy. Institutes like the China Qigong Science Research Association, or CQRA, as we're all familiar with, were established with the party's blessing. Masters such as Yan Jin performed external Qi emissions before live audiences and scientific panels, reportedly altering biological samples or instruments through concentration alone. Even scientists and military researchers joined in, seeing Qigong as a patriotic science of the human potential, an indigenous rival to Western Psi research. So by the mid-1990s, however, Qigong's popularity alarmed the authorities. They had unleashed the monster. They'd unleashed too much Qi. Mass rallies began looking uncomfortably close to religious revivals, and claims of quote-unquote supernatural powers drew skepticism. The 1999 crackdown on the Falun Gong group marked the end of the public Qigong boom, though milder, health-focused versions remain widespread today. Now, I've mentioned Falun Gong in other episodes. It's a whole goddamn it's a whole goddamn thing. It's a whole epic. While they have been the victims of various human rights atrocities perpetrated against them, namely organ harvesting of those who've been imprisoned by the state, the leader of Falun Gong, his name escapes me at the moment, but he's made some not so great statements. So I don't know, if all believers or practitioners within Falun Gong buy the party line that he's selling, but so it's not that great. but outside of China, they made they've done quite well for themselves, essentially. They've got a media empire, essentially, but largely this is said to be for the express purpose of fighting against Chinese propaganda. So it all falls under the umbrella of the more you look, sooner or later, there are no heroes, except me. You can trust me. Yeah. So the aforementioned Qigong deviation, or Qigong psychosis. See, during the height of Qigong fever, psychiatrists began reporting cases of Zhuhuo Rumo, literally, once again, fire entering the demon. It's a term from Taoist lore meaning losing control of inner energy practice. So in Western clinical language, this became known as Qigong deviation or Qigong psychosis. I believe this is synonymous as well with various psychological disorders or misuse or effects of Kundalini yoga. It's kind of the same thing, same idea, same energy being harnessed, except that when it's done wrong, it'll fuck you up, basically. But symptoms include insomnia, hallucinations, manic euphoria, which doesn't sound that bad, after prolonged meditation or breath control, paranoid or messianic delusions. No, I'm Jesus. There's patients who believe that they had acquired cosmic powers, or inversely, were under psychic attack from somewhere, some force, possibly the Chinese government. In some cases, physical distress, such as heart palpitations, tremors, etc., this has been interpreted as a key imbalance. Chinese psychiatrists debated whether this was a culture-bound syndrome or a modern form of psychotic break triggered by intense autosuggestion and group reinforcement. Is this some cult shit? Yes and no. For the government, it was also a political metaphor. Qigong sickness came to symbolize the dangers of unregulated belief. And the state quietly folded its parapsychology programs back into medical and sports research. It's strange, like a lot of these Asian nations have sports enfolded into certain government ministries, we'll call it. It's very strange that sports is so, or at least held in a government regulatory position. Very weird. But reframing Qigong as a health exercise rather than a mystical science was very important to sort of try and attempt, at least, to get a hold on things. So China's state parapsychology programs. Let's get into the meat and taters, the Szechuan steak, the witch and sizzle of this, if you will. So bridging over from the USSR, like after Stalin's death and the slow thaw of Sino-Soviet relations. I don't know if that's an outdated term. You'll have to forgive me if it is. Don't get mad at me. I just found it in the books. Sino-Soviet relations. Chinese scientists gained limited awareness of Soviet psychotronic and bioenergetics research. Maoist China reinterpreted parapsychology through Marxist materialism, much like Russia, seeking scientific proof of the hidden potential of the human organism. And orgasm, maybe. Some of them, possibly. Rather than a spiritualist or religious explanations that have, been so prevalent through all of history. The CCP's goal was, if psychic phenomena could be materialized, it could be weaponized or used to demonstrate socialism's superiority over quote-unquote Western metaphysics. Where Soviet psychotronics chased invisible rays and torsion fields, Chinese researchers looked inward in the human body itself. There was the birth of the quote-unquote extraordinary human body functions movement, bodily functions, of the 1970s to 80s. In the early 1970s, Qigong fever rises as traditional Chinese medicine is politically rehabilitated after the Cultural Revolution. Qi, the life energy, is reframed as a scientifically measurable biofield. In 1979, publication of reports on specific children like Tang Yu or Zhang Baosheng, who we'll get into later, had allegedly, these people, the masses of China, were reading through various texts that these children were allegedly able to read through, opaque materials, or they moved objects with their mind, etc. This featured in state-run media and journals like the Nature Journal or Ziran Zashi. It sparked a wave of national excitement and debate. Now, once again, there's several notable figures, some who will lean into more than others. One I find extremely intriguing due to some connections with the U.S., but this includes Zhang Baosheng, who's the most famous Psi celebrity, quote-unquote Psi celebrity, reputed to teleport small objects and later tested by military research. There's also Li Hongzhi. He was the Falun Gong leader. This is a guy who's got some unpopular opinions, but Qigong masters were blending science, nationalism, and spirituality. Then there's Qian Xuesen, who's a rocket scientist, U.S. deportee, and Chairman Mao's personal, quote-unquote, father of Chinese astronautics, who publicly endorsed parapsychological study as a new science of human potential. Now, some of you may have possibly clicked on the phrase rocket scientist. That's because he's a former associate, professional associate, a co-worker and a fellow traveler of an American rocket scientist by the name of Jack Parsons. It's very strange. It's very strange that this man who worked on rocketry in America with Jack Parsons ended up becoming one of the key central figures in all of this Chinese parapsychology research. Now, Qian Xuesen, or Qian, is probably what I'll call him going forward. But Qian allegedly had nothing to do with any of this, any of the occult shit that Jack Parsons was into. I think he attended one dinner at the quote-unquote the parsonage one time with his wife. But allegedly there's no crossover, no touching tips here. Well, as far as Qian's concerned. So, but it's just odd. It's very odd. Like, what are the odds that Qian, the rocket scientist, who was, it's just very strange. I find it very strange. It's one of those weird, just history, just bitch slapping you with weirdness, just out of nowhere, out of left field. So, anywho, we'll get more into him in a bit. The late 1970s to 80s, there were official institutions which were popping up, such as China Somatic Science Research Institute in Beijing, the Qian Science Research Society under the State Science Commission. There was the military-linked 701 Institute, look out, and PLA Academy of Military Science. These entities conducted controlled tests of external key emission, basically the Hadouken from Street Fighter. Hadouken! To use another pop culture touchstone. There were attempts to affect biological or electronic systems remotely. There were actual studies done, and these are just a few examples of key accelerating seed growth, key affecting infrared film, key altering enzyme reaction rates in the human body and bodies of animals. Many studies co-authored by reputable physicists and engineers, including Gu Hansen and Yan Jin, both noted for key energy healing demonstrations. During Qigong fever and public parapsychology, you have, by the late 1980s, roughly, Qigong had become a national craze. It was blending health, mysticism, nationalism, and science. Yan Jin's televised experiments in 1988 drew millions. Even top party officials attended. The movement became quasi-religious and forever, creating mass organizations outside direct party control. The CCP tolerated and even promoted it initially. It reinforced cultural pride and gave a quote-unquote scientific spin to Chinese metaphysics. Then comes the crackdown, the backlash crackdown, backdown cracklash. In the early 1990s, scientific establishments begin to push back. Beijing Science and Technology Daily publishes exposés debunking fake psychics. In 1999, the banning of Falun Gong marks the death knell of official, quote-unquote, extraordinary human functions research. The CCP reasserts control. Swooped in, took back over. Here comes Big Daddy Chinese government and communist ideology. What began as materialist human potential had grown into unregulated spiritual populism. Fuck, can't have that. Not if we're going to keep running shit, smoothly at least. So, the remaining research folded into covert military biocommunication studies, psychological warfare, and bioelectromagnetics research under military intelligence. Now, in contrast with the Soviet Union, like the USSR materialized the mind as a field, like it's a projection from the human body, and this is how they applied their investigations and research into torsion, electromagnetics, psychotronic devices, etc. The PRC, or the CCP, materialized mind as body. So chi, bioenergy, this is a physical extension of consciousness. It's really pretty much the same. They're just using different language for how they viewed and prepared these models of investigation. Taoist alchemy, Buddhist meditation, and martial arts breathing techniques fed into the concept of trainable psychic skill, something ideologically compatible with state collectivist ideology. The PLA's human potential units allegedly continued experiments into the 2000s, investigating remote viewing, biolocation, key projection on various diagnostics and sensor technology, mind versus machinery, essentially. Civilian Qigong morphed into wellness culture and energy healing so as not to get clapped the fuck down. Some defectors claim elements persist under camouflage in neuroscience, cybernetics, and cognitive warfare programs. However, this is unverified. I stumbled across one individual by the name of Simon Dion, D-I-A-N, I believe his name is. Actually, it's Duan, D-U-A-N, excuse me, who is American educated, but he also did a lot of work in China in this, under these various disciplines. He's got some very interesting things to say. He goes a little bit of undoubtedly woo-woo territory, but worth looking into. It's very interesting. He's got an interview with Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove under New Thinking Aloud. I'll try to, if I hopefully remember, I can post the interview in the show notes. Very interesting, very interesting. Basically, this is the more or less the roadmap for how things took off. Now, once again, I said we were going to get into some specific characters who are instrumental in much of this study. And once again, one of the top dogs is Qian Xuesen, or Xu Xinxian. He and Jack Parsons absolutely crossed paths, and their connection is one of those real-world intersections between occultism, rocketry, and Cold War paranoia that feels almost too strange to be true. In the 1930s and 40s, Qian was part of the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory at Caltech, also known as GALCIT, in Pasadena. There, he became one of the founding members of the GALCIT Rocket Research Group, a.k.a. the Suicide Squad, the OG Suicide Squad, along with Frank Molina, Edward Foreman, and Jack Parsons, the self-taught chemist and occultist who co-founded JPL and was a member of Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis. Qian and Parsons worked together directly on early rocket propulsion experiments, helping form what would become the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and Aerojet Engineering Corporation in 1942. Qian was a brilliant mathematician and physicist, entirely rational in outlook, as would help in later under communist ideology. He's entirely rational in his outlook, but he was aware of Parsons' quote-unquote eccentricities and occult pursuits. At Caltech, Qian was reportedly present for at least one of Parsons' chaotic rocket demonstrations, one of which set a building on fire, leading to the group being dubbed the Suicide Squad. There's no evidence Qian engaged in any of Parsons' occultism, but the proximity of the two in history is just fascinating. It's incredible. China's future father of rocketry, working alongside America's most notorious occultist/engineer. It becomes symbolic in later conspiratorial and esoteric retellings. And why wouldn't it? You know? Once again, just sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. During the McCarthy era, however, Qian was accused of communist sympathies. Not hard to do for a Chinese national living in the United States. This is largely due to his contacts with leftist scientists. Watch out. Symbionese liberation scientists. In 1950, he was placed under house arrest, and in 1955, he was deported back to China as part of a diplomatic exchange, quote-unquote. Once back in Beijing, he became the chief architect of China's missile and space programs, effectively doing for China what Wernher von Braun did for the U.S. Can you imagine how differently history would have turned out had we not given up such a valuable asset, such a brilliant, beautiful brain to China? I don't know. Things happen the way they do for whatever reason. It's all part of a mysterious plan where millions die every day from religious genocidal wars and retarded children are born every second. It's all part of the mysterious plan. Anyways, His early experience at Caltech, working with Parsons and other rocket pioneers, directly seeded China's later aerospace and parapsychology research, since Qian later publicly endorsed somatic science. This was another one of their, Russia calls it psychotronics, CCP calls it somatic science, and various psychic studies in the 1980s as extensions of human engineering. So yes, Qian Xuesen and Jack Parsons, once again colleagues and collaborators in the formative days of American rocketry. This connection is both historically factual and symbolically rich. Together they represent the twin alchemies, spiritual and scientific, that shaped the mid-20th century's technological mysticism, underlying much of what we know today as the psychic gap of the Cold War. So the sorcerer engineer, quote unquote, of Red China, born 1911, died 2009. Man, Qian Xuesen was China's premier rocket scientist, but his intellectual orbit drifted well beyond physics. He was educated at MIT and Caltech under Theodore von Karman, who helped found JPL in the 1930s and 40s, and briefly moved in the same Pasadena circle that included Jack Parsons and by proximity, the OTO occult science milieu sounding Aleister Crowley. Though there's no evidence that Qian practiced occultism, he was fascinated by the unity of mind and mechanism, the idea that human consciousness could interface directly with physical systems, mind over matter. Deported from the U.S. during the McCarthy era as a suspected communist in 1955, he became the architect of China's missile and space programs, the father of the Dongfeng and Long March series. Yet, even at the height of his technocratic career, Qian's writings veered into metaphysics. In essays from the 1980s, he proposed what he called, quote-unquote, somatic science, or T-Keju. Nailed it. A framework to study Qi, ESP, and psychic healing as legitimate natural phenomenon. He championed research into extrasensory perception, psychokinesis, and Qigong-derived super abilities. Super fucking powers. Arguing that Western science's materialism blinded it to the higher dimensions of energy. Which I can get behind that. Qian drew inspirations from cybernetics. A lot of the Soviet scientists looking into this stuff drew a lot of their inspiration from cybernetics as well. Essentially, reframing the human mind as the interlay, the relay of circuits between the mind, neurological systems, to matter, to physics, the physics of the outer world, the laws of nature, essentially, creating connections where previously there had been none or remained hitherto unseen by the masses throughout human history. So Qian drew inspiration from cybernetics, Taoist cosmology, and systems theory, envisioning a quote-unquote science of the human body as an antenna, a bridge between brain, biofield, and the cosmos. Under his influence, institutions such as the China Qigong Science Research Society and military-linked labs pursued controlled telepathy, remote influence, and biological field experiments through the 1980s to 1990s. His reputation gave those programs political cover and clout. His reputation lended quite a bit of credence to these programs. So if the father of Chinese rocketry said psychic forces were worth studying, you can bet your ass that they were worth studying. So by the time of his death in 2009, Qian occupied a paradoxical place in Chinese culture, a national hero and a quasi-mystic. To scientists, he was the rational planner of satellites and nukes. To esoteric circles, he was the visionary who legitimized the state's flirtation with Qi-powered consciousness. His legacy threads together missile silos and meditation halls, illustrating how the Chinese technocratic imagination never fully separated engineering from alchemy. There's also a revolution and a manifesto that very much lays on the shoulders of this man. So what people called Qian Xuesen's somatic science revolution was a series of essays, lectures, and policy letters from roughly 1978 to 1988, where he publicly urged China to build an entirely new science, that could be studied, a study of quote unquote the supernormal functions of the human body, or renti gongning. Excellent. Okay, the key document is his 1981 essay, quote, Somatic Science and the Scientific Technological Revolution, unquote, published in Guangming Ribao, followed up by follow-ups in Nature Journal, 1982, and other state outlets. It isn't a single coherent book, but it reads like a manifesto for a scientific occult renaissance within the People's Republic of China, PRC for future reference. Human consciousness as a measurable field. Qian argued that the brain and body generate a real energetic field, qi, that can act non-locally. His phrasing often echoed electromagnetic language, much of what you would see in the psychotronic literature. He proposed, quote-unquote, bioinformation as a carrier wave linking mind to matter, much like a signal in a control system. And this merges qi, or qi, with cybernetics and systems theory. It's a blend of Taoist metaphysics and engineering logic. The universe is a feedback system. So drawing on Norbert Wiener's cybernetics, Norbert Wiener, one of the fathers of cybernetics, he viewed the cosmos as a self-regulating feedback loop of energy and information. Human beings could, through training, such as Qigong and meditation, etc., access higher control nodes, quote-unquote control nodes, in this universal system, essentially a technological model of Taoist transcendence towards a new scientific revolution. Qian explicitly called for a second Copernican revolution to study subjective experience and psychic ability with the same rigor as physics. And he warned that Western science was trapped in Cartesian superstition, a.k.a. a materialist faith that ignored higher dimensions of reality. State-level research mobilization. This man was responsible, not solely, but very much largely, responsible for the mobilization of state-level research. He lobbied the State Science and Technology Commission to fund, quote-unquote, somatic science as a strategic frontier, paralleling biophysics and astronautics. So by the mid-1980s, roughly, his advocacy gave rise to semi-official institutes, such as the Beijing Institute of Somatic Science, and the research tied to the People's Liberation Army. Now, this is where we get into the occult-ish elements and definitely weird science. It's got weird science written all over it. Minus, well, I don't know. Maybe there was some weird psychic projections of hot supermodel women. Whoa. A lot of it's still classified. So there were investigations into psychic children. Qian endorsed reports of quote-unquote super children able to move or read objects with the mind. Akira was a documentary filmed in real time and illustrated in real time. He cited tests allegedly proving telekinesis and clairvoyance as quote-unquote statistically repeatable phenomena. There was Qigong and energy healing, or as energy healing. He treated ancient breathing and internal alchemy practices as biotechnologies, suggesting that the human nervous system could be tuned like a radar set. Dimensional physics. Qian hinted that consciousness might operate through higher spatial dimensions, language that mirrored Soviet quote-unquote torsion fields. I learned a little something about torsion fields. There we go. Speculation of the same era. And there's integration of science and spirituality. He invoked both Marxist dialectics and Taoist cosmology. One of those is super boring. The other one, pretty cool. Claiming that communism's materialism must evolve to include, quote, the study of spirit as a form of matter in higher order, unquote. So the high strangeness comes in with Qian, not as a fringe crank, if you will, but he was the chief architect of China's nuclear missiles and space program. This wasn't just some wackadoo. He used the immense authority to legitimize parapsychology, treating psychic energy as a form of strategic technology. So in effect, he turned the dialectic of Marxist science inside out. If all matter has emergent mind, then mastering mind could be the next stage of socialist scientific revolution. USSR. Union of Socialist Scientific Revolutions. He saw himself as the godfather, well, not himself, but something like a midwifery, a fusion of Taoist internal alchemy and rocket-era cybernetics, and his quote-unquote somatic science revolution became the theoretical umbrella for China's Qigong-era parapsychology boom in the 1980s. So this is like a brief summary, basically, of how Qian's manifesto directly shaped military or university psi programs, i.e. the PLA's, People's Liberation Army, somatic science base, the Xinjiang group, and the Beijing children ESP tests. There was an American equivalent known as the GATE program, which the jury's kind of still out on that, but it is mentioned in certain CIA documentation. So anywho, this is where Qian's somatic science revolution stops being purely philosophical curiosity and turns into one of the most surreal intersections of military science, occult metaphysics, and socialist futurism in the 20th century. This is a detailed outline of how his ideas translated into actual research institutions, experiments, and semi-clandestine programs roughly spanning the era of 1979 to 1999. So you have the institutionalization of somatic science, circa 79 to 85. The key catalyst was Qian Xuesen's essays and letters to the Central Committee of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, or CAS, which convinced several senior officials that supernormal abilities, quote unquote, supernormal abilities, might have national defense value. The Beijing Institute of Somatic Sciences, or BIS, established in 1980, is founded with CAS and PLA support. The research focus was on telekinesis, remote vision, biological info transfer, etc., and conducted sealed envelope reading. Dippity-doo! Dippity-doo! Ha-ha! Yes! Experiments with psychic children. The most famous of these being Teng Yu and Hu Yifan. No relation to the chess prodigy, apparently. Internal reports claim that success rates above random chance using Qian's bioinformation field model as theoretical justification. By the way, the communist preoccupation with chess, especially in opposition to the West, quote unquote, America, the UK, etc., there are some weird fucking stories that go into a lot of the height of the Cold War 1980s era chess matches between Russian chess prodigies and their counterparts in the West, such as, well, I can't remember the names, but my God, they go into some strange places. That's a whole nother topic, but if you're interested, look into it. So there's PLA-affiliated laboratories as well. Military units under the Academy of Military Medical Sciences, or the AMMS, and the National University of Defense Technology, or NUD, gotta bust that NUD, quietly opened somatic function research groups. The focus was on psychic detection, bioenergetic influence on materials, physical nature, mind over matter, once again, and electromagnetic emissions from the human brain under stress. Experiments used Faraday cages, shielded rooms, and sensitive electromagnetic instruments and diagnostic technology to detect anomalous signals, directly inspired by Western psychotronics and Soviet torsion field research. There was collaboration with universities, Tsinghua, Peking University, and Xi'an Jiaotong. Yeah! Hosted Qigong physiology studies measuring galvanic skin response, i.e. the biochemical electrical signals emit by the human body. There's EEG coherence and possible infrared emissions during deep meditation. These programs were presented as quote-unquote scientific exploration of traditional culture, allowing occult-adjacent research to exist under the protective banner of nationalism. Then you have the psychic children phenomena. This is one of the weirdest, just very strange. And I think the Soviets and Chinese Communist Party were somewhat ahead of the curve on this compared to America and the GATE program. And I find it odd that just the GATE program, Stargate, I mean, you know, that's just a passing phrase, but GATE was an acronym, I believe, for Gifted and Talented Education, something like that. At some point, I'll get into the whole the American intelligence agencies looking into the education system in America in order to filter out potential psychic or gifted children, etc. Because the reports in the news are still kind of coming out on that, and people are like filtering out what's real from the bullshit. So I kind of want to wait on that one to see a little bit more of what stands true. But regardless, 1981 to 1983, a paper in Nature Journal, a.k.a. Ziran Jiaxi, in early 1981 titled, quote, "Some Experiments on the Extraordinary Function of the Human Body," unquote, claimed blindfolded school children could read messages sealed inside opaque envelopes. Yes, sir! You're correct. Within months, over 100 laboratories across China replicated or claimed to replicate similar results. The phenomenon was dubbed Tei Gongning, aka special functions, as mentioned at the top of the episode. Qian personally endorsed these tests, writing that such children represented the dawn of a new scientific era. By 1982, state television aired demonstrations of school children identifying colors, shapes, and Chinese characters through sealed containers. Critics within the Academy of Sciences, notably the physicist Zhang Zhenhuan, called it pseudoscience, which he's not wrong, but the party remained intrigued due to the possible military implications. And then you have the PLA's somatic science base. So occurs roughly from the mid-1980s to early 1990s. There was the formation of an internal PLA document from 1983, which has since leaked via dissident researchers, which authorized creation of a somatic research base under Unit 73610 near Chengdu. Said it before, and I'll say it again. Anytime you have an organization with the most vague, nebulous name of, Office 367, watch the fuck out, because they're into some dark, naughty shit. Anywho, so the focus is on controlled testing of psychic warfare applications, including thought influence, telepathic detection of hidden objects, and remote disruption of instrumentation, mind over machinery. Researchers adopted Soviet-style jargon such as biocommunication, psi induction, energy information transfer, etc. Funding was justified as a hedge against U.S. and Soviet parapsychology programs. Once again, the psychic gap. Don't want to fall behind in the psychic gap. Qian's theoretical papers were used as the doctrinal backbone, especially his claims that, quote, information fields can propagate through multidimensional space-time, unquote. There were other key figures involved, such as Xin Cheng, who was the PLA biophysicist and Qigong researcher who was later rumored to have tested long-range mental influence on radar signals. You have Qin Jiaxu, a neurophysiologist who studied changes in neurotransmitter levels under Qigong trance states. And then you have Lin Shuhua, an AMMS technician who tried to replicate Soviet psychotronic generator designs using piezoelectric and electromagnetic field modulators. So along comes the Qigong science boom and inevitable backlash, 1986 to 1999. As the Qigong movement exploded into mass popularity, Qian's somatic science provided it with intellectual legitimacy. Magazines such as Somatic Science Research, which I found a few issues of, translated in English, interesting stuff. Find it on the internet. God bless that internet, huh? Tool of the devil. One of the best ever made. Science circulated, also one of the worst. Science circulated wild claims. Somatic Science Research and Qigong and Science circulated wild claims on ESP, telekinesis, psychokinesis, often citing Qian's equations. He had formula backing up many of his observations and hypotheses. Charismatic Qigong masters like Yan Jin or Zheng Baosheng or Hu Yaojin, nailed it, were publicly tested under semi-official auspices. Once again, however, you must keep in mind that a lot of this was not done under extremely rigorous scientific laboratory specifications. Zheng Baosheng famously demonstrated teleporting. He teleported pills through sealed vials during state-observed sessions, allegedly, an event which Qian later cited as, quote-unquote, evidence for a new physics. But by the mid-1990s, skepticism grew inside the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Physicists denounced superfunction, quote-unquote, or the research into superfunctions as pseudoscience. Superfunction pseudoscience. The 1999 crackdown on Falun Gong, labeled as a quote-unquote heretical cult. Heretical from what? Communist ideology.
What are you, fucking commie? Huh? No, I ain't no commie. Oh, you better not be. I don't want no commies in my car. No Christians either.
Which led to the wholesale dismantling of Qigong institutes and psychic laboratories. However, scattered military research into quote-unquote bioinformation and quote-unquote cognitive field interaction persisted quietly under the Defense Science and Technology Commission into the 2000s. Even after official discrediting, many of Qian's concepts, such as information field, mind-matter resonance, multidimensional control systems, all quote-unquote, those are his terminology, for much of this activity, they reemerged in the 2000s under different terminology. The PLA and National Defense University papers on, quote, cognitive domain operations, unquote, occasionally cite early somatic science language, now reframed as psychological informational control. Once again, a lot of this falls under, whether intentionally or not, the umbrella of psychological warfare. Qian's fusion of Marxism, cybernetics, and Taoist cosmology left a lasting subtext in Chinese discussions of artificial intelligence, consciousness, and unified information fields, the elusive beast through which Einstein was constantly having to change his diapers in search of. In short, his somatic science revolution seeded the intellectual DNA for both China's 1980s psychic craze and its modern discourse on mind control and cognitive warfare. The boundary between mysticism and military science under Qian was never, ever clearly drawn. Very loose demarcation lines here. We'll treat the late 80s mind-machine research as a liminal bridge, if you will, between China's psychic science and its modern cognitive AI ambitions. It's a classic occult science hinge, the moment when mystical biofields start being described in the language of data and control systems. This is also another umbrella under which most of this research fell, into the technological sphere of what in the West we know as Neuralink. TM? I don't know if that's the... It's the mind-machine interface technology. And this is where a lot of it continues into this day, and it gets... it gets into some heady territory that I will explore in a future episode on transhumanism, because who has the edge, essentially, on this? This is where we're getting into the blend between human intelligence and machine intelligence. Once again, cybernetics being a underlying model and method for the investigation of much of this phenomena in China. Doesn't this make you want to kill yourself? Welcome to Communist China. In Russia and in America. So there's biocybernetic experiments. I mean, the term cyborg has been around for a while. And it denotes the mixture of human physiology with machinery, technology, etc. And this is one of the overarching scientific disciplinary foundations through which much of this has been filtered. A lot of this investigation and research into this phenomena. So by the late 1980s, Qian Xuesen's somatic science had reached an impasse. You shall not pass. The claimed psychic phenomena were too irregular for the military. So a new idea emerged. Translate the invisible into instrumentation. And along comes the PLA Cognitive Biophysics Project. Documents later summarized in Somatic Science Research from 1988 to 1991, which described PLA teams adapting EEG and biofeedback systems to test quote-unquote two-way coupling, which sounds saucy, but it's not that saucy. It's saucy, but not in the way you're probably thinking off the top of your head.
Smothered me in gravy, you big dirty man.
You dirty dog, you. Two-way coupling existing between brain signals and electronic circuits. The AMMS Laboratory 208 in Beijing, Laboratory 208, they couldn't be up to anything nefarious. No one who speaks German could be an evil man. They reported experiments in which subjects attempted to modulate oscilloscopes or servo motors through mental focus. There's a lot of similar research being done in the American equivalent the remote viewing and psi investigations and research on the ability of the mind to affect random number generators, which, I don't know. I don't know much about random number generators, but it seems awfully random. I don't know. I have to look more into it before I make a informed decision. But anyways, the term was used, the term yin-yang kongji. Yes, thought control. Successes were marginal. Fluctuations within normal instrument drift, but internal memoranda portrayed them as breakthroughs. So obviously, when funding's on the line, or execution by state firing squad, in which your family will be fucking charged for the bullet, that's a fire under the ass to get results, basically. So you might fudge the numbers a little, just maybe a little. Just enough to not get caught, hopefully. So engineers reference both Qian's information field resonance, quote-unquote, and Soviet psychotronic generator blueprints. There were Qigong EEG correlations. The Tsinghua PLA Biocybernetics Group measured synchronized EEG bursts during group Qigong meditation. A lot of this research also finds that, and most paranormal research that I've seen at least, when you have a group dynamic functioning, there are stronger and better results. Something about group belief, the overmind, the zeitgeist, once again, just the application of multiple minds towards the same goal or function. It's very strange. But researchers likened the pattern to a laser coherence, quote unquote. Lasers, Linda. Reports claimed subjects could influence each other's EEG phases even when isolated, which is an echo of telepathy framed as field entrainment. These studies fed into later military interest in, quote, collective mind state modulation, the conceptual ancestor of today's cognitive domain operations. We're getting some real egghead shit here. As we, I don't know, I'd like to think usually tend to do at some point, but the terminology betrays it, most definitely in this instance. Zheng Baosheng, one of the Psi's tested, one of the golden children of this program and this research, perhaps the most famous, quote-unquote, applied experiment. In 1983 to 1984, magician turned psychic Zheng Baosheng was tested by the Beijing Public Security Bureau. Under controlled observation, pills allegedly, quote-unquote, passed through sealed glass vials. Holy shit! Qian attended a session and argued the effect demonstrated, quote, spatial resonant coupling, unquote. Western observers later noted sleight of hand possibilities. The event became a state-sanctioned myth. You see a lot of that in the psychotronic and extraordinary bodily functions research. State-sanctioned myth-making happens. It's a tool of the intelligence agencies. It's quite prominent. But this was reinforcement of official belief in mind-matter permeability. The borders between the two were weakening. So from psychic control to neural engineering. By 1992, PLA researchers were using electroencephalographic pattern recognitions, EEG, to train operators to move cursors or robotic arms via biofeedback, essentially the first Chinese brain-computer interface prototypes. The early results were publicized in PLA medical journals in 1993 under titles like, quote, biosignal control of peripheral devices, unquote. Civilian press spun them as, quote, scientific proof of Qigong power, unquote. But within the labs, the vocabulary shifted towards cybernetics, pattern learning, and signal adaptation. The ideological pivot took place when the Falun Gong crackdown began in 1999, where all psychic terminology was scrubbed. Psychosomatic science became cognitive informatics, or, quote, neural information engineering, unquote. Yet the intellectual lineage was clear. The dream of uniting consciousness and machine had moved from mystical aspiration to technical doctrine. So by the early 1990s, Chinese parapsychology had quietly transformed into proto-transhumanism. When the 1970s experiments sought proof of the soul, the 1980s sought to capture it in data. This rebranding from key fields to neural networks allowed the state to continue exploring the same frontier under a new, quote-unquote, rational flag. Today's PLA papers on quote-unquote cognitive domain warfare and quote-unquote human-machine integration still echo Qian Xuesen's conviction that mind is a controllable energy field, the same occult axiom rewritten in binary code. Part of me really wants to segue into fourth generation warfare, asymmetrical warfare, because it's very integral in understanding what you will be seeing a lot of probably in the future as how wars are fought, and especially psyops, psychological operations, psychological warfare relies heavily on fourth generation warfare, asymmetrical warfare, etc. QAnon is a perfect example of a psychological operations, tactics, and warfare waged on the American public. That's why it pisses me off so bad. That's one reason. It's not just the surface level shit. It's that these are warfare tactics being perpetrated upon the American people. It's right up there with MK Ultra, etc. So another figure, we've mentioned him several times, is Zhang Baoxing. It's the perfect counterpoint to Qian Xuesen. If Qian was the state's quote-unquote scientific mystic, Zhang was its quote-unquote living miracle. This is a concise as possible biography of sorts that basically accentuates the high strangeness meets serious state research perspective by and for the CCP's parapsychology. So he's like the psychic hero of Red China. He was born in 1959. If Qian Xuesen supplied the theory of somatic science, Zhang Baoxing supplied the spectacle, which is important because it helps tag in belief. Belief is an important tool. This is if Qian was the steak, Baoxing is the sizzle. And anyone who knows their advertising demonology knows that you gotta have both to fucking sell that shit. So a factory worker from Liaoning province with little formal education, Zhang rose to national fame in the early 1980s as the most celebrated of China's officially recognized superfunction psychics. His story begins amid the post-cultural revolution thaw, the time when everyone was calming down like, whoa, that escalated quickly. Well, they're still reeling from everything that happened during the Cultural Revolution. This dude pops up. I mean, newspapers were suddenly allowed to discuss UFOs and ghosts and ESP, etc. Once again, this guy fucking filled the void. Like, he showed up. He's the right man, the right place at the right time. So in 1982, Beijing Science and Technology Daily published reports of ordinary citizens performing feats of telepathy and psychokinesis under observation. Zhang was among those tested by scientists at the Chinese Academy of Sciences and by officers from the Beijing Public Security Bureau. Witnesses claimed that he could do the following. Okay. Read hidden text sealed inside envelopes, dippity-doo, move small objects through solid barriers, dematerialize pills from one sealed vial into another, etc. These demonstrations were filmed and witnessed, allegedly, by leading figures. I gotta throw a big stinky allegedly in there every time. These demonstrations were filmed and witnessed by leading figures such as physicist Li Shuhua and, perhaps more importantly, Qian Xuesen himself, who concluded that Zhang was, quote, a window into higher dimensions of human potential, unquote. The party press branded him China's Uri Geller, which I almost said earlier, but I didn't want to give it away. But make of that what you will. Uri Geller has been classified a certified fraud by many people, but there's still many people who believe that he possesses certain abilities. I don't know. I gravitate towards the latter. But once again, you have to have the sizzle. You got to have the sizzle to sell the steak. So, moving on. They called him China's Uri Geller, but without the Western superstition. Very important to classify that. So, by 1983, Zhang had been granted semi-official status within the Ministry of Public Security, allegedly helping investigators read, quote-unquote, read suspects' minds or locate hidden evidence. He was basically doing psychic detective work for the party. His fame coincided with the Qigong fever movement, where traditional breathing and energy practices merged with Cold War-era parapsychology. So under Qian's umbrella of somatic science, Zhang's abilities were cited as empirical proof that qi, or qi, was an objective information field. Between 1985 and 1988, he toured research institutes giving demonstrations under controlled conditions. Rooms lined with glass, electrodes on his head, the whole gamut, while technicians monitored electromagnetic fluctuations. Each experiment was written up in journals such as Qigong and Science or Somatic Science Research, etc., and the flagship organs of the movement. Their propaganda mouthpieces, as another way of looking at it, potentially. As the 1990s opened, skepticism grew. Investigators from the China Association for Science and Technology accused Zhang of sleight of hand and untestable conditions. Rival Qigong masters denounced him as a fraud, and true believers framed the backlash as a materialist conspiracy. Because isn't that always how it goes? If you don't agree with me, if you don't believe or think like I do, you're part of, you're one of them. Capital T-H-E-M. In 1995, he was quietly resigned to a private life, quote unquote, private life, but his appearance is curtailed as the state distanced itself from public mysticism following the eventual Falun Gong crackdown. Despite his fall from grace, Zhang Baoxing remains a folk hero in China's underground paranormal scene. Videos of his 1980s demonstrations circulate on Bilibili and Chinese Reddit analogs, Bilibili being the YouTube analog, I guess you'd call it, with captions equating him to a Chinese Saint Germain, quote unquote. Tito! In esoteric circles, he symbolizes the brief union of scientific modernity and shamanic power, a moment when the Communist Party itself was flirting with proving the existence of the immaterial, the invisible. His alleged through walls experiments inspired later psychotronic interface research, the notion that consciousness can resonate through matter without mechanical mediation. For Qian's disciples, Zhang wasn't just an anomaly, he was experimental proof that the human body could act as a transducer between dimensions. Ride the snake. Ride the snake. Zhang Baoxing's story bridges the visionary and the absurd. A man who went from factory laborer to state-sponsored psychic and back again. His trajectory marked the apex of the Chinese psychic science epoch, roughly 1978 to 1995, a period when the boundary between laboratory and seance collapsed under ideological sanction. Today, his name appears in both skeptical exposés and classified bibliographies of quote-unquote human-machine integration studies, a fitting afterimage for a culture that never fully exercised its faith in the miraculous. Zhang's tests, quote-unquote tests, were the showcase phenomena, the dog and pony show. But behind them were actual research programs that functioned a lot like the Chinese X-Files, blending intelligence, parapsychology, and ideological control. So, some of the experiments involved, we'll discuss some of his experiments in which he was involved, and then we'll move into some other anomalous phenomena studies, which more or less correlate to an actual Chinese X-Files. So there's Zhang Baoxing's core experiments, roughly from 1982 to 1988, which involve or include the envelope reading and hidden character tests. This was in Beijing, 1982 to 1983. Zhang's first official test took place at the Institute of Space Medicine. Space medicine is another, when this term was first coined in the late 30s, early 40s, I believe, Nazis were heavily involved. You can be damn sure of that. But the terminology space medicine has strong connections to all of this kind of stuff, all this anomalous research, psychic phenomena, etc. This is an offshoot, or excuse me, the Institute of Space Medicine was an offshoot of the Academy of Sciences. Researchers sealed slips of paper bearing random Chinese characters inside opaque envelopes, double wrapped in aluminum foil. How fitting. Under supervision, Zhang held the packets to his forehead, dippity-doo, claiming he could see with his heart. Observers recorded him accurately reading 6 out of 10 characters in the initial run. Subsequent replications produced chance-level results. Still, physicist Li Shuhua insisted the outcomes exceeded statistical expectation. Press coverage in Science and Technology Daily, August 1982, created a sensation, inaugurating the Teiyi Gongning, or special function craze. In Qian Xuesen's later writings, this became, quote, evidence of non-electromagnetic information transfer through living systems, unquote. Then we next have the through-wall object transfer tests by the Public Security Bureau in Beijing, 1983 to 84. Just saying that sentence out loud is just weird as fuck. Okay, so these are the most famous demonstrations. Under controlled conditions, Zhang reportedly moved small items, paper clips, pills, matchsticks, etc. The idea that they used pills, too, is pretty strange. It's possibly a covert delivery mechanism into the human body. At least that's where my mind went, but, you know, I'm devious as well. So anyways, this is moving such items into or out of sealed glass bottles and steel tubes. The test protocol, designed by Song Jinji, who was then with the Ministry of Public Security, used high-speed cameras and magnetic sensors. The footage showed blurred hand movements and slight vibrations of the container just before the object appeared, quote-unquote, appeared within. A subsequent frame-by-frame review suggested momentary gaps in visibility consistent with misdirection, but the official report concluded, quote, the human mind may induce spatial phase transformation at the micro level, unquote. Qian attended one of these sessions and coined the phrase spatial resonant coupling, which became canonical in somatic science literature. To the believers, it was applied psychokinesis, but to the skeptics, a brilliantly executed magic trick legitimized by communist ideology. Brilliant. Bit of a paradox, if you will. Next up are the remote perception experiments. Qian in 1985 of the Northwest Institute for Telecommunications Engineering. That's another weird theme with a lot of this stuff, is that many of these experiments and research and investigations are taking place in institutes related to telecommunications. Very strange, very strange. Zhang participated in telepathic target identification trials modeled on Soviet biocommunication studies. He and a second subject, isolated in separate shielded rooms, were shown alternating light patterns and simple geometric shapes. EEG readings displayed weak but synchronous 8 Hz alpha spikes. When tested with random binary sequences, success dropped to baseline, like statistical chance area. But internal memoranda touted a 70% hit rate. Ooh, that's 5 more than the remote viewing status calls for. 70% hit rate and called for, quote, defensive applications against psychic interference, i.e. potential psychic spies, more or less. These Qian trials later fed into the PLA's biocybernetics group. Then you have the mind-controlled instrumentation studies done in Beijing from 1986 to 1987. PLA Medical Unit 208. Oh, man. Nothing sinister about that. Adapted EEG biofeedback gear to detect signal changes during Zhang's concentration exercises. The objective was to determine if a psychic could modulate machine output without physical contact. Mind over machinery. Readouts showed transient spikes in galvanic response coinciding with cursor drift on an oscilloscope. Possibly simple muscle artifacts, fast twitch muscle fiber, if you will, but publicized as, quote, direct mental control of instrumentation. These sessions inspired follow-up research into brain-computer interfaces, reframing psychic power as neuroengineering. Then you have the cross-medium perception and time displacement claims mediated through Chengdu University in 1988. Zhang's last major appearance occurred at Chengdu University's Somatic Science Lab. Here, he attempted to describe objects hidden inside sealed photographic film canisters and once claimed to foresee dice outcomes seconds before a throw. Later on, he was taken to Las Vegas. No, I'm joking. But wouldn't that be awesome? That'd be a better Rain Man plot. Lots of international intrigue thrown in. Definitely Judge Wapner. Results were inconclusive, and internal skepticism was rising. So by 1989, the movement was collapsing under scandal, and Zhang withdrew from the public eye. Now, China's X-Files, i.e. state studies of anomalous phenomena, while not formally called anything under one specific name, several CCP-era institutions played the same role as governmental X-Files, cataloging reports that straddled parapsychology, UFOs, and supernatural folklore. The National Defense Science Commission's, quote, Human Body Science Coordination Group, unquote, did investigations from 1979 to 1983, housed within the Commission on Science, Technology, and Industry for National Defense, or COSTIND, tasked with collecting military and civilian reports of telepathy, clairvoyance, spontaneous combustion, and unusual biological emissions. Oh my. Archives reference both Soviet biocommunication studies and Chinese folk terminology such as yin qi. These reports were sent to Qian Xuesen for theoretical review. There's also the Chinese UFO Research Organization, or CURO, founded in 1979. Semi-official, but staffed by Air Force and university engineers. That's fine, okay. You know, it sounds a lot like some of the early UFO groups in America. They collected nationwide UFO reports, many overlapping with quote-unquote light being or flying entity sightings. Humanoids, etc. Not just the ships themselves, but potential occupants. Non-human biologics, whatever the terminology just drives me crazy sometimes. Whatever. Okay. Some cases, particularly a 1981 Inner Mongolia pilot encounter, were cross-filed under somatic science due to possible mental communication, telepathic contact with non-human intelligence. Public security, quote, special phenomena tasking. In the mid-1980s, this was police bureaus in Beijing, Nanjing, and Xi'an quietly investigated ritual killings, miracle healings, and cult practices for signs of subversion. Analysts began using the phrase spiritual pollution incidents, quote unquote. I do love some of the terminology sometimes. So, literally a bureaucratic category for the paranormal. Surviving memos translated in David Palmer's Qigong Fever book describe, quote, joint meetings with scientific personnel to assess extraordinary reports, unquote. Then you've got PLA Unit 543, the Unknown Signals Research Office. This is alleged to have taken place in the late 1980s. It's mentioned in several declassified logistics rosters. The unit reportedly analyzed anomalous radio, radar, and physiological data. Some researchers later migrated to China's early neural network warfare programs. Neural network warfare. Mind-controlled mecha. At least that's how... that's what I'm picturing. I don't know. It's probably something much boring compared to that. This showed how psi research infrastructure morphed into electronic warfare R&D. So, Zheng Baosheng's public feats were just the visible crest of a much deeper wave. Behind him, military and academic offices were quietly cataloging every claim of ESP, UFOs, yin energy, and anomalous quote-unquote biosignals, searching for exploitable patterns. It was a hybrid of laboratory mysticism and bureaucratic paranoia. Penoids, a genuine state-sponsored quote-unquote X-Files, for lack of a better term, whose findings would later be recoded as cognitive informatics and cultural psychology. In short, where the West had Scully and Mulder, China had engineers and party secretaries with EEG machines and incense burners. Now, there are various other mystery cases involving UFOs, apparitions, psi outbursts, etc., that these offices actually logged and are verified, quote-unquote verified, to the extent that they appeared in print. So if it's written, it must be true. These appeared in print or government bulletins between 1979 to 1999. These are sort of documented or semi-documented anomalous cases that Chinese UFO and somatic science groups actually logged, discussed in print, or cited in official or semi-official reports between 79 and 99. So each entry, well, here, we'll get right into them. So 1979 to 1983 is kind of the opening era. One of the first cases, we'll say, It's the Kaifeng light sphere encounter in 1979. This happened in the Kaifeng, Henan province. A meteor-like blue orb reportedly hovered above a PLA training ground for nearly 3 minutes before vanishing vertically. Straight up. It just went straight up in the air. Radar operators recorded a short-range echo bubble, quote-unquote echo bubble. This is the first case logged by the new Chinese UFO research organization, the aforementioned CURO. It's filed as, quote, unknown aerial optical phenomenon, unquote. Internal memo speculated about electromagnetic plasma with psychogenic effect, which, man, that phrase right there, electromagnetic plasma with psychogenic effect. That may possibly encapsulate all known UAP phenomena. I mean, coming at it from one angle, like if you're more of the Jacques Vallée, John Keel, ultra-terrestrial school of thought, then the phrase electromagnetic plasma with psychogenic effect, although it's a bit highfalutin in the terminology, it may perfectly encapsulate what the fuck is possibly going on with all this stuff. But anyways, soldiers complained about dizziness and feelings of euphoria during this incident, and that's why they were attributing psychogenic effects to it. Now, if there's some kind of sensory manipulation to it, like it can possibly psychogenically control what you see, what you think you saw, that adds a whole new, very strange, very weird dimension to things that will make cataloging and investigating essentially render it useless. But how will we ever know? So, I mean, we can record what we think we saw, and there's still, there's still merit to that at least. So, anywho, let's see. Next up is the Xi'an teleportation youths case in 1980. This happened in Xi'an, Shaanxi. Middle school students at a science camp allegedly caused crumpled aluminum foil to appear inside sealed bottles after a Qigong workshop. The Academy of Sciences observers repeated tests with mixed results. Zheng Baosheng's success 1 year later was modeled directly on this case. This is archived under Human Superfunction Type B. So apparently they've got a classification, a whole classification system. Then we've got the Voice on the Airwaves incident, 1981. This happened at the Lanzhou Air Defense Command. Shortwave operators intercepted Mandarin voice traffic giving nonsensical weather data, repeating in perfect 10-second loops. The source was triangulated, and it fell into a vast swath of empty, unopened sky. No satellite traffic, nothing like that. Just a big range of open, uninterrupted, unpopulated blue sky. The investigation was handled by Unit 543,
Those bastards.
Unknown Signals Office, and was labeled as psychotronic interference, possibly a Soviet broadcast experiment. Okay, and then we've got from 1984 to 1989, this is the Somatic Science rise. And during this time, we have the Baoding mass levitation event in 1984. This happened in Baoding, Hebei. During a large-scale Qigong rally, dozens of people claimed that their feet, quote-unquote, rose without effort, right off the ground. PLA psychologists recorded synchronized heart rate and EEG coherence among participants. So there was at least a synchronization of physiological effects taking place in these people. Don't know about the levitation. Let's take their word for it. This was investigated by Tsinghua Biocybernetics Group and PLA Unit 208. And evidence of quote-unquote collective resonance fields were recorded. Later cited by Qian Xuesen as proof of a macro-scale key coupling. Once again, synchronization of, at the very least, this is what was recorded, a synchronization of physiological effects among the participants. Then we've got the Heilongjiang frozen pilots case, 1986. This happened on the Heilongjiang/Siberian border. 2 crop dusting pilots reported an orange disc, quote-unquote disc, that emitted a pulse, causing instant aircraft freeze. The engines died, Frost covered the cockpit glass, and both were revived minutes later with normal instrumentation. Not the pilots, but the planes and machinery themselves. Kuro and the local meteorological bureau investigated this, and this information was filtered up top. This was filed as a Class A close encounter. Physical samples of frost reportedly showed anomalous crystalline structures. So says the Flying Saucer Review from 1987. Then we've got the Wuhan sleeping village outbreak.
Got you all
1987. I've actually heard, for lack of a better term, urban legends about this one. This is one of the few I actually heard about before. This happened in Wuhan, Hubei, the infamous Wuhan rural settlements, where for 5 nights, entire households fell into an unrousable sleep exactly at 2 a.m. This was investigated by the Public Security Bureau with Somatic Science Institution consultants. There was no gas leaks, no contagion. Investigators recorded unusual ELF, or extremely low frequency magnetic fluctuations. And the speculation was that this was some kind of collective biofield entrainment experiment, one of the eeriest Chinese Communist Party era psychotronic events. This instantly, reading the information gathered from the investigation on this, made me instantly think back to the Psychotronics episode, where there was a lot of talk about being able to remotely switch off human consciousness to just make people go to sleep, allegedly, by Soviet psychics or psychotronic devices, etc. Allegedly. Next up, we've got the era from 1990 to 1999. This is the sort of, due to the Qigong boom taking place, and then the crackdown on it all. There's an incident called the Shenongjia Hairyman Expeditions, 1990 to 1993, which occurred in the Shenongji Nature Reserve in Hubei province. Teams backed by the Chinese Academy of Sciences searched for a local Bigfoot analog known as the Yeren. They found hair samples of unknown primate species. Officially a cryptozoology case, but internal somatic science notes treat the Yeren as a biophysical anomaly, possibly an interdimensional mammal. Next up, that's one of the leading theories on all this Bigfoot hobnobbery, is that they may be interdimensional cryptids. Who knows? Next up, we've got the Dalian Phantom Satellite sighting in 1992, which occurred in Dalian Harbor. Nighttime observers saw a metallic craft rise from the sea and vanish. Navy radar tracked an ascending target accelerating from 0 to 4,000 kilometers an hour. Don't have the mileage in front of me for the American listeners, but roughly 2,500. 0 to 4,000 kilometers an hour? 2,500 miles. 2,500 miles. The investigation was done by PLA Navy Radar Command and the Kuro. It remains an unidentified aerial object, quote unquote. The files were later sealed. It was mentioned in the 1994 Jilin University UFO Symposium's proceedings, and this is how it, for lack of a better term, leaked into the public. Next up is the Beijing Mind Fire case, 1994. This occurred in Chaoyang District, Beijing. Apartment fires starting near sleeping occupants. Witnesses saw faint blue halos, etc. Public security and PLA psychotronic technicians investigated. Infrared analysis found no accelerant. So these fires were just spontaneously occurring. Not so much spontaneous combustion of a human body, but fires starting and appearing out of nowhere. This is classified as self-ignition of unknown origin. The media rumor was that this was backlash from Qigong energy. Then you have the Kunming Light Column and Missing Time reports from 1998. This occurred in Kunming, Yunnan. Bus passengers observed a luminous pillar descending onto a hill. Several reported 30 minutes of missing time. This is a provincial UFO office investigation. Once again, their research information fed up top. This is inconclusive, but later reprinted in Zhangkuo Keiju Qigong in 1999. Beautiful. One researcher privately called it the last somatic science field case, at least for that era. We don't really know the mutation, the the reframing, the restructuring of a lot of this stuff as it occurred under later anomalous phenomena occurring under the banner of a lot of this stuff becoming reframed in the context of mind-machine interface. But across 2 decades, these cases show the same feedback loop. There's a folk anomaly, weird shit, weird shit happening, scientific curiosity, bureaucratic study, ideological unease, and quiet reclassification. It's the whole. It's practically an entire episode of X-Files. You could call that the plot rise and descent. So by the early 2000s, somatic science morphed into cognitive informatics, but the pattern endures. PLA papers on cognitive domain operations and neural influence technologies reuse the same diagrams once labeled as biofield resonance. There are various other intriguing threads through Communist Chinese government investigation into anomalous phenomena. There's the CCP and the paranormal frontier shadow zones of science, essentially. Officially, the Chinese Communist Party maintains a strictly materialist worldview. That's a given. Yet within China's sprawling defense science bureaucracy, rumors persist of quote-unquote special interest units devoted to phenomena that cannot be comfortably reduced to Marxist-Leninist physics. Mike Fitzgibbon's is a nuclear physicist. So you have Project 8610 and the UFO files. In 1994, Chinese newspapers briefly reference an internal Project 8610. Nothing vague or sinister about that. Said to collect aerial anomaly reports from pilots, radar operators, and civilians. The China UFO Research Organization, or CURO, which at its peak claimed over 50,000 members, including academics and retired Air Force personnel, was tolerated but closely monitored by state security, much like in the United States. Declassified fragments suggest the PLA Air Force's Radar Command in Lanzhou and Nanjing University physics faculty quietly exchanged data on electromagnetic anomalies, atmospheric plasma, and unidentified flying objects. Some ufologists believe the project evolved into a classified database run by the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation, or CASIC, treating UFOs as potential foreign or experimental craft, yet others whisper that the PLA found quote-unquote non-terrestrial signatures in northwest deserts and the South China Sea. The most public of China's cryptid studies emerged in the 1980s under the China Association for Science and Technology's Wild Man Investigations into the Yeren, as mentioned earlier. Expeditions to Hubei and Tibet sought the Yeren and the Yeti. The field researchers later admitted that quote-unquote military observers often accompanied them. In parallel, scattered reports from the Institute of High Altitude Biology in Shanghai mention quote-unquote unknown humanoid DNA fragments, unquote, that were never cataloged, possibly misidentified primates, though some Chinese paranormal writers link these to Jian Ring or mountain immortal legends, the 8 immortals of Taoism, masters of internal alchemy and the achievement of biological immortality, etc. Around the late 1990s, as the State Security Ministry ramped up cyber monitoring, online rumors claimed that the Academy of Information Engineering, a PLA-linked cyber division, experimented with quote-unquote Ling detection, devices measuring emotional or psychic residues at battlefields and execution grounds. Oh, how cheerful. Allegedly inspired by Soviet biolocation research, these ghost field sensors were rumored to use microwave interference to map residual electromagnetic anomalies. Nothing has ever surfaced publicly about these investigations, this research, but references to Ling Bo Yanju, a.k.a. numinous wave research, appeared in 2 now vanished conference proceedings. I ran into that a lot looking at this stuff too. Stuff that, as far as citing the source, once again, psychological warfare. A lot of it's still out a lot of this stuff is out in the open, and it's it's easy to backtrace and catalog the origins of certain reports, etc., where they come from, who said it, and when. But some of this stuff, especially into these more anomalous phenomena investigations, a little bit harder to verify. But once again, you know, propaganda, selling the sizzle and not the steak plays a large part in a lot of this. So by the 2000s, the older Qigong-era psychotronics language reemerged in research on brain-computer interfaces, or BCI, if you will, holographic consciousness, and quantum cognition. So we're looking into the heady mix of consciousness studies with technology. And this is, once again, this is where a lot of this stuff ended up filtering into that I saw, and goes into places that even I have a hard time wrapping my head around. Who, me? Yeah, it's true. Okay? It happens. Officially, this is neuroscience. But informal notes from PLA publications, especially those linked to the National University of Defense Technology, sometimes use unmistakably esoteric phrasing. Quote, human thought is a wave capable of coupling with external informational fields, unquote. This language directly echoes 1980s Teiyi Gongneng, or extraordinary functions, bodily theories, suggesting continuity between the old psi programs and cutting-edge artificial intelligence and neurotech research today. There are also new, quote-unquote, forbidden city theories. Independent Chinese bloggers, often writing anonymously on Weibo or Bilibili before being censored, claim that deep beneath Beijing's Zhongnanhai compound exists a red chamber of the dragon, quote-unquote, an underground command center not only for nuclear control, but also for strategic cognitive warfare. The legend asserts that experiments combining Qigong sensory training, EEG synchronization, and quantum field projection are performed on, quote-unquote, volunteers, quote-unquote. Volunteers, quote-unquote, in sealed environments. None of this is confirmed, but the persistence of such stories signals that the intersection of the occult and the technological is very much alive in the popular Chinese imagination. Maybe what we called the Cold War of minds never ended. Maybe it evolved from telepathic experiments and thought projection in the 1980s to brain/artificial intelligence fusion and quantum consciousness modeling today in the 2020s. If the Soviets dreamed of psychic weapons and the Americans feared them, then perhaps the Chinese simply folded them into the fabric of their future. And when you look up at the sky at night, over Xinjiang, over Moscow, or over Nevada, over Texas even, and see a flicker of light that shouldn't be there, ask yourself, whose technology are you really seeing? And whose mind imagined it first? My voice sounds like shit. Oh, man. I want to close out on a strange note. This is something I've maybe mentioned before on the show, randomly. I'm not sure, possibly. But it plays in with my longstanding interest, the intrigue I have in the manipulation of religious / psychospiritual beliefs by military, intelligence agencies, etc. It has to do with time travel. While the scientific concept of time travel is not outlawed, the Chinese government, the communist Chinese government, has historically taken issue with the depiction of time travel in popular media. There was a TV and film ban. In 2011, China's media authorities banned time travel plots in films and TV shows. They cited concerns that such stories, quote, promote feudalism, superstition, fatalism, and reincarnation, unquote, and, quote, casually make up myths, unquote, that disrespect history. The reasoning behind this is that the major reason for the ban was to discourage stories that portray historical events and figures in what the authorities consider a frivolous or inaccurate manner. They have a problem with rewriting history. The communist Chinese government has a problem with the idea of rewriting history. Despite the ban, time travel media has still appeared in China, suggesting that the enforcement depends on the specific plot and can be inconsistently applied. For example, filmmakers can use plot devices like dreams to circumvent the ban. The government has explicitly regulated the concept of reincarnation, which is odd because it's a fucking fundamental staple of many of the Buddhist beliefs, but whatever. Far be it from me to question the communist Chinese government. 1 million something Chinese communist bureaucrats can't be wrong. In 2007, it passed a law requiring government approval for quote-unquote living Buddhas to be reincarnated, which is essentially an attempt to control Tibetan religious affairs. So very strange, very strange. In the end, maybe all of this, the experiments, the psychic soldiers, quote unquote, the half-whispered rumors of mind machines and weaponized consciousness says more about us than it does about the people or systems we study. Because, if we're being honest, the Western mind, kind of sick. It's afflicted. Chronically, habitually, terminally addicted to quantification, to pinning butterflies on boards, even if it means killing them in the process. We can't let mystery breathe without trying to dissect it, to qualify, to quantify, to name, to endlessly measure. And that same compulsion is bound up with far older instincts, the binary programming that's been running in the background since mankind first appeared. Good versus evil, light versus dark, self versus other. Every culture tells ghost stories, but in the West, we insist on exercising them, even though they were probably fucking here first. Well, that's just how we are. That's how we think. Everything has to be cataloged, categorized, classified, or cast out. The data that doesn't fit, thrown in with the shit. Johnny Cochran, actual quote. What can't be measured is qualified madness, and what can't be proved is purged. And yet outside of this narrow frame, in places like China, Tibet, Mongolia, the line between physics and metaphysics was never quite so clear. Consciousness, nature, energy, matter, they were all seen as variations of the same thing. The ancestors, our ancestors, aren't gone. They're vibes, man. They resonate around us. Mountains aren't quote-unquote objects. They're presences. That's animism. The recognition of the divine within everything, especially nature. It isn't above or beyond us.
It's all up in
woven into the fabric of the world around us. So maybe that's what really terrifies us in the West about things like psychic or spiritual entities or abilities. Whatever language a culture uses to name the invisible. It's not that these forces can't be measured. It's that they refuse to be programmed, domesticated, brought to heel, and put in a collar and a leash. They point to a world that's alive and aware, one that watches us back as we look at it. A world that doesn't fit inside of a cage, doesn't fit in the categories of either or. And maybe that's why these stories out of China, Russia, even our own government contracted groups, such as the remote viewing programs, etc., anywhere else experimenting with the unseen, hit so deep because they remind us that the mind we've built our civilization on might not be the only one. And it's certainly not the final one. Aww. And that's going to be my final thought on today's Jeopardy. I mean, Jerry Springer Show. I mean, Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. I've got a huge list of sources that I will try really hard to include in the show notes. Man, this stuff was fucking awesome and fun to look into. It really reframes a lot of what we see and perceive today as being a cult, and the Marxist materialist attempts to take the invisible realms and quantify and qualify them. It kind of brings all this stuff one step closer to a tangible reality that we can see and feel before us. Like if quantifying and qualifying it, even though that takes a lot of the magic and mystery out of all this stuff, it does have the adverse effect of bringing it just a little bit closer to a reality in our minds. It crystallizes the existence of some of this stuff, for better or worse. So But yeah, that's going to be it for today's episode. My voice is giving out. I apologize if you've heard me voice cracking through all of this. I've been screaming at a lot of TV lately. So yeah, my name is Mike Lucht. This is Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. I don't know, I haven't got a calendar in front of me, but trying to plan something special with the fellas for a Halloween episode. Might have a couple of Halloween episodes. Might do some extra goofy fun things and stuff I've found that's also quite horrifying and terrible to the human psyche. I want to smash all that together and hopefully get together with the guys and bring you some of the most horrible things we can find that exist on the periphery of our reality, and present it to you for your listening enjoyment. So once again, thank you for listening. I appreciate you guys. I love the clicks, the listens, the likes, the comments. Man, I love to hear comments. I love to hear back from you guys. Potential future subjects to explore, investigate, etc. Always love those. So yeah, keep it up, folks. Love you guys. Thanks for listening. See you next week. Peace.
What are you, fucking commie? Huh? No, I ain't no commie. Oh, you better not be. I don't want no commies in my car. No Christians either.